All right, this episode I sit down with Scott Parkhurst. Scott is a hunter from New York. I met Scott. We've been talking online, I guess, for quite a few years here, but I met him in person at Huntstock, New York in 2024. Spent a good amount of time with him there, and we've been in touch ever since online and sending messages back and forth. And Scott was in town. His daughter is playing a volleyball game. She's a collegiate volleyball player, and she had a tournament in the same town here where I record the podcast, so that lined up really nice. I said, come on into the studio. Let's talk deer hunting. So Scott, like I said, he's from New York. He hunts a bunch of different ways. He's been a part of a deer camp, and still hunting and tracking was part of how he hunted growing up. He really got into bow hunting in the year 2000. He hunted a little bit before that with the bow, but he got real serious into bow hunting in the year 2000. He's killed some big bucks. He's killed a lot of deer, and he's got a ton of knowledge to share and pass on to you guys. So we do quite a bit of talking about strategy, some storytelling, his first ever buck, his favorite hunting story, being out there with his daughter when she got her first deer. And there's a lot of great tidbits, including one thing at least that I'm going to be bringing into the season this year for sure. A very interesting calling tactic. You know, it's when he explains it, you don't really you go, oh yeah, that makes sense, but it's a call that all of us have heard about before and used. I just hadn't heard about it being used in this way that he brings it up, and that's something I am absolutely going to use this year. I've already got a perfect spot where I'm going to try it, and I think it's going to work out. But the way he describes it makes total sense, and is something I haven't done before. So I hope you guys take away something from that. And there's plenty of other great stuff to take away from this podcast as well. So let's get into the podcast now with New York deer hunter Scott Parkhurst. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Suburbia podcast, and I've got Scott Parkhurst with me today. Thanks for coming, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Scott, I met you in New York, right, at Huntstock, New York. Was that the first time we met?
Yeah, we had chatted online a little bit. I was excited for Huntstock to come to New York, and ran into you like the first day there. You were on a golf cart driving by me when I pulled in the parking lot, and you took me on the scenic tour all over the whole entire event. And
yeah.
I was there every day. It was a great time.
Yeah, you were there on Thursday night for our VIP party, and that was our first year doing it there. Ended up being the only year.
Yeah.
So people didn't really, not many people showed up for that VIP party. And I remember driving through the beautiful, the fields. I mean, it's just gorgeous out there.
It is nice, and I don't spend a lot of time in that part of New York. I'm about an hour and a half west of there.
Yep.
It's beautiful. New York's broken up into a lot of different regions, and that's definitely a real pretty part of the state.
Yeah, and there's so many deer. I mean, I was just surprised how there are so many deer around. I didn't see a lot of bucks, and I know in that area in particular, there's a lot of Amish around, and I think that puts a hurting on the bucks a little bit.
Yeah, they definitely have a tendency of filling their ice houses or however they do it.
So what part of New York are you in that you hunt right now?
I grew up in the eastern end of Lake Ontario, a little small, you blink, you'll go through it, Texas, New York. Really, Mexico, New York's the address. It's right at the eastern end of Lake Ontario. Really known for Lake Ontario fishing, salmon fishing. People come from all over the world, all over definitely the Northeast and, Pennsylvania and all that stuff for the salmon that run up and down our rivers. But I grew up right on the Little Salmon River. I grew up fishing as soon as I could walk. I was fishing. I was doing something outdoors. Yep.
So, and you worked on charter boats for a while, right?
I did. I had a little marina down the road from my house, Salmon Country Marina, and the owner, who actually, he just passed away here a couple weeks ago.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
That was saddening news. Really great family, really great guy. But, he was a family friend, and, he was a neighbor, and they had a beautiful marina there. And, I was like 10, 11 years old. I was down there and looking to do stuff, watching all the charter captains come in with the fish. I would clean the fish cleaning stations. And the first job he gave me was pick up cigarette butts, me and his son, who was a couple years younger than me. And we ended up almost filling a 5-gallon bucket of cigarette butts all over the marina. And he ended up just giving us a big bill of cash. I can't remember if it was $20, $25 or whatever, but he goes, I'm not going to have you guys do that again. But, I got to know some of the charter captains, and then, the next year, one of them asked, hey, you want to go out with us? And I was kind of like a second mate. I'd clean the boat when we came in. I kind of learned, and then I started working on a few charter boats full time. That was a great job being a kid in high school.
Oh, yeah.
I'd get up in the morning, 4 o'clock, ride my bicycle down there, get on the boat, go out, go fishing, come back at noon. All my friends were just waking up. I had, $100 in my pocket, and and go out and catch fish with people.
Oh, getting paid to go fishing is a good job. Any time, any age,
Yeah, it was definitely a sportsman's paradise growing up there. I mean, you always had something in the outdoors to do. And, from the fishing, I did that, every day that I could. But also like small game hunting. I had a BB gun as old as I could remember and had a little scope on it. And, I'd go out and plink, everything I could shoot at. And then, I got a little recurve bow when I was a kid, and I'd go out and, target practice with that and, walk around. And then, obviously transitioned into, small game hunting, when I was 14 and, chasing rabbits and partridge and just out with my buddies, wandering through the woods, doing as much as we could.
Did you ever get anything, any small game with your recurve? Did you take that out at all?
The only thing I got with my recurve, and I was sitting there, and there was a wood pile, and a little chipmunk stood up about 10 feet in front of me. And I drew back, and I didn't think in a million years I'd hit it.
Yeah.
And I hit him right between the eyes, and
Wow.
He dropped, and I remember my mom picked on me. I went home, I felt so bad. I'm like, I can't believe I just shot that for no reason. And
yeah.
She's still surprised that I hunt to this day because I was so upset that I shot that chipmunk for just because I had a recurve bow. And I guess that was a lesson I learned because I have a lot of respect for the animals. I always have, and it started with that chipmunk that I shot.
I think every kid's got a similar experience to that. I mean, when I was a kid with my BB gun, I still remember this day. In my backyard, we had a detached garage, and there was snow on it, and there was I forget what type of bird it was, just on the top of the roof, and I shot at it with the BB gun, hit it, and it just slid down the roof and left a blood trail on it, and I was like, why did I do that? Yeah, and I've never done that again.
Yeah, it teaches you a lesson. I mean, hunting is a awesome sport. It's your passion, my passion, and a lot of like-minded people.
Yeah.
But it's not the taking of a life that
no.
It's way more to it than that, and it's hard to explain that to some people. But I think you learn at a young age. When you do something silly like that, and you realize this isn't what it's about. It's a lot more.
What is your favorite part of hunting? What is it about for you?
Well, it's changed as I've got older, and my life. From when you're a kid all the way to now, now it's really what keeps me going year in and year out. I don't care if I shoot a deer. I want to see deer. I want to continue to learn. And when the opportunity presents itself, I'm a way more selective now than I was, when I was younger. But it's really just that time in the woods, the peace and quiet. My kids are graduated from high school now, and I'm still working, but I just turned 51, and it's really my time away from the chaos of the world and just to keep my own mind sane, and it's what I look forward to every year, and I think a lot of other people do as well.
Yeah, it's just something that keeps you busy, keeps your mind engaged, the whole year. It's a hobby and a passion that you can enjoy the entire year, not just during deer season. Like I really enjoy the scouting in the off season and shed hunting and finding new spots and putting cameras up, checking cameras, the preparation. Like I'm going hunting in New Hampshire next week. I was never planning on doing it, but it just lined up, and I'm gonna go up there with a new friend and just hang and hunt. And I wasn't planning on it, right? I wasn't gonna start until October 6th when Mass opens. But now I found myself, like today we just made the plans, and now I'm like super excited. It's it's next Tuesday. I'm going to be out hunting, so I got to get my gear ready. I've got to, go through the whole process, but that's the fun part of it.
It is. It comes up. you look forward to it all year, and then all of a sudden it's like knocking on the door. And I'm in the same boat, but I kind of have it planned out. I'm not going to do anything early. The first week in October, I picked up some new property. I'm going to mess with that in October. It's about an hour from my house, and then I have a hunting camp out in Western New York now that's just south of Buffalo, and I'll spend at least the first week of my vacation down there, hunting really hard.
Yep. How long have you had that camp?
The one down in Buffalo, this will be year number 4, but we didn't hunt it the first year. We picked it up kind of late after the season, but it was a lease that opened, and I always wanted to explore Western New York. It's known for most of the bigger bucks in New York State come south of the New York State Thruway, and then
and then Long Island.
In Long Island, but that's all still south. It's all along that whole corridor out there in central and western New York. Just some really nice bucks, and I've really enjoyed it out there. It's been another piece of the state that I've learned, and I've learned a lot hunting out there the last couple of years.
So is there actual like dwelling on the property, a cabin, a camp?
Yeah, there's a small little it's like 12 by 24 like an Amish shed type thing that was somebody prior fixed up the inside. It's all knotty pine, and it's got electricity. I think it cost me like $7 a month electric bill until hunting season. We run a coffee pot and a little bit of stuff. We got 4 bunks, a little table, and you get out. It's got electric heaters in the walls, and
it's all you need.
It's absolutely perfect.
Camp is a simple thing, man. Yeah. It's the best.
And it's a lease. I don't buy all these. I have forestry company that I've leased with for years, and I look to see what's coming available and kind of explore. And this one, it's 99 acres bordering almost 3,000 acres of state land.
Yeah.
And it's got a cabin with all that stuff that I can stay in as a base camp, and then you can explore all over the whole area.
Yeah, and you probably don't even hunt that 99 too often because you've got the entire area, right?
Yeah, we explore the state land a lot.
Yeah.
A couple really good travel routes on the property that we lease, where I killed a nice buck last year, and the year before, not far from that same spot, I killed a really big black bear that I didn't expect to kill. And we can talk about some of that here as we go. But
oh, yeah. So what does that property look like? How does it lay out? Is there any agriculture on it, fields? Is it all wooded? Like, how does that property lay out?
No, you leave the property and you go straight uphill to the top.
Yeah.
I think it's like 2,500 feet above sea level when you get up to the top.
Yeah.
And, there's little ravines through it, and then it drops down pretty steep on the opposite side. And there's some plateaus, and there's a lot of little nooks and crannies where the deer can sneak through. You'd never see them. And then that kind of rolls over into the state, and there's a whole bunch of that comes together. And but it's steep. I do a lot of walking, through the summer and then this time of year to stay in shape, just to hike up those mountains. And we use our ATVs a little bit. We'll get up to a certain level, and then we'll walk into our stands, especially bow hunting. I don't want to be sweaty. In November I sit from daylight till dark. I don't ever plan coming out until the end of the day, or I shoot something. So
you
want to minimize being cold and sweaty when you get there.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about some all-day sits, because I love all-day sits, and in November, obviously, especially because I've seen the last few years more than ever. Probably because I've spent more time in the woods, but the best movement happening between 9 and 11, and you hear it all the time. But for me, I've just seen tons of movement. I haven't been able to get in the woods, pre-sunrise with the little kids the last couple of years, very many days. So I would drop my son off at daycare and then bounce up into the woods and be set up like 8:30 or something. And at first, that was kind of tough for me to get into the mindset of like, hey, this is the new normal. But after a couple of days, I just started seeing mature bucks all the time, a half hour after I got into the stand, and it was really good action from 9 to 11. What's your experience been?
Same. Prior to 2009, I wasn't picky. If it had antlers and I had a shot, especially with a bow, I wasn't passing that up. And then, I learned a lot. Hunting with some of the guys I hunted with, and some people that I considered like mentors to me. And
Pat, what was his name?
Pat Haney. One of my dad's here today. We're going to watch my daughter's volleyball games tomorrow locally here, and that's how we ended up hooking up with this. But my buddy Pat Haney kind of took me under his wing, and He showed me just some simple pointers that I was doing. He worked with my dad and a bunch of other guys, and they all hunted together for quite a few years. And they got a trip. I was in the Navy still, and they were going to Illinois in 2000 and asked me if I wanted to go. So I lined up my Navy leave and planned on doing it. And I really started shooting targets in the backyard where I was living down in Virginia at the time. And
Was that your first year bow hunting?
that was the first year I got serious and had some pointers and kind of knew what the heck I was doing.
Yeah.
'Cause I started bow hunting about 1991. I was like 17 years old. And I could probably sit here and talk about 3 hours about every deer that I missed, screwed up on, buck fever, every excuse in the world. I just couldn't seal the deal, and a lot of it was just what I was doing and what I didn't know I needed to do bow hunting. And then around that 2000 time frame, I came home a few times, and they were shooting 3D leagues. I came out and did a couple of those with them, and listened to some of the guys that have killed deer with a bow, and they kind of gave me some simple little pointers that I ended up shooting 2 deer on our trip to Illinois. I'd like to say it was a giant, monster buck, but, I shot a small 8-point. It was the first buck I ever got with my bow, and I filled one of my doe tags, and those were the first 2 deer I ever shot with my bow were on that trip.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. I think it's always better when your first deer is a smaller one. If you started out and you shot a 170 on your Illinois trip, right? It's like you can get caught up in thinking that's going to be the norm, and then just being big buck or bust from too young an age. And I think that can ruin hunting for some people.
Yeah, well, up to that point, I'd killed quite a few deer with my gun.
Yeah.
But bow hunting was like a whole nother world, and it was a whole nother challenge that, how I grew up initially deer hunting, bow hunting was complete opposite. So it really took me to get into a different mindset, which now, it's what I love about the woods. I've learned so much more about deer by watching deer and not shooting them than I have, pulling the trigger. So,
Oh, yeah.
and bow hunting really gives you the opportunity to just do a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned in your email to me that you pass 15 to 30 bucks a year. And I've been doing that. I think last year I passed 50 bucks, and I really enjoy that part of it.
Yeah.
It's when especially ones that you're looking at and you're like, ooh, that's a really nice 2-year-old or a nice 3-year-old, and I'd love for him to live another year. I mean, with so much public pressure though, if you can make the choice to pass them, and I do, but knowing full well that there's a lot of other hunters are going to take him, so it's not a guaranteed he's going to survive. But I still enjoy, letting him go in that moment, right? Letting him live and giving him the opportunity to get older.
Yep. And, you get like you're competent at something and you're consistent. For me, I wanted to step up my challenge, and that's obviously, most people dream of shooting a big buck, and some of these guys, you've had on your podcast, and some of the guys that, I admire and have a lot of respect for, they've been killing bucks for dozens of years. And, where I grew up, when I was younger, people didn't kill big bucks very often.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody got a big buck somewhere near our town, like everybody knew about it. The picture was going around in the paper, and,
Yep.
it was a big deal. Like I remember, I kind of grew up, like I said, on the eastern end of Lake Ontario, and, when I was 12, 13 years old, maybe even a little bit younger, I'd go up there with my grandfather. They had a camp up in the Tug Hill. And that was rough country, and there wasn't a lot of deer. Like, if there was quite a few guys that hunted up there, there was like 3 different camps, and, 1 or 2 guys would usually get a buck every year. And, that was a big deal. It was celebration, and, it was not like it is today, and it was not the type of hunting that, you see on TV.
Yeah.
Like, somebody shoots a buck or somebody sees a buck, everybody goes over there to help, and, it's spike horn or a 4-point little crotch horn or something.
Yep.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And that was tough hunting, like, big woods. You talk about the guys that hunt the Adirondacks and up in Maine and New Hampshire, in Vermont, where you talked to me about hunting. It wasn't the glory days. Like, there was times I remember you'd go 2 or 3 days, you get some snow, and then somebody coming back to camp and say they saw a deer track, and, we'd all, where was it? Where was it headed? And, everybody would head that way. It was not like there was a bunch of deer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds similar to my deer camp in Vermont, my whole experience there. I mean, if you look at the list on our wall, everything is mostly spike horns and 4-pointers and 6-pointers. But if it's a 6 or an 8, most of the time it was a little one. But that's not what deer camp was about. It was about, like you said, if somebody got a buck, it was a big celebration. It was a lot of fun. If somebody was close by, they'd go help drags. But most of the time, they're long drags by yourself when we were at camp. But yeah, that's, if you have enough years of that under your belt, then, once you pick up a bow or you get into some better deer hunting country with, more deer and bigger bucks, it really opens up your eye. Like, I couldn't believe when I first started hunting in Massachusetts, when I bought my house. Previous to that, I never even thought to, scout around Massachusetts or be hunting here. Every year I'd just still go to deer camp for all 3 weekends of rifle season. And during COVID, I was like, I'm going to throw some cameras up around here. I'm going to do some scouting around my new house and just see what it's like. And I couldn't believe the amount of deer that looked like that, like the 6-pointer there and like that little 8 up there. I was blown away and super excited about those. And then, in the first year hunting, there was a lot more deer bigger than those around, and I couldn't believe it, like ones that look like these.
Yeah.
And then it's easy for your mind to switch onto, all right, I think I want to start trying to kill bigger deer, just because you should hunt, where killing a deer at my deer camp that looked like that would be like a deer of a lifetime. And down here it isn't. So, like, I think depending on where you hunt, you kind of move your goalposts a little bit.
Yep, absolutely. And that's kind of where, like I said, 2009, I kind of look at that year where, I talked to that Pat Haney and my dad and all those guys. My dad had killed one a year or two before that made the New York State, big buck club. He was over 120-inch archery buck. And
nice.
It was a nice buck. And then a couple of the guys down there were, I think we had 3 bucks that made the New York State Big Buck Club in a couple of years, and there was a lot of success. There was a lot of big buck seen, and I'm like,
out of your camp,
the camp that my dad still belongs to. Like I said, around that time I got a little more serious, and I started seeking out different areas, and then as I learn a new area, I'm always looking for the next area. I've kind of got a little hungry. I realize that there's more years behind me than there are ahead of me, and if I really want to, start focusing on shooting bigger bucks, I got to hunt where there are more bigger bucks. And I've done, some different leases for different parts of the state. I learn it, and then, I'm always looking for the next spot, and really just trying to, challenge myself to, figure out an area and then be successful.
So what kind of hunting were you primarily doing out of your Tug Hill camp? Still hunting and tracking?
Yeah, a lot of that was still hunting. There was a little bit of tracking, but not like, I see now. I read the Big Bucks the Benoit Way and, how to bag the biggest buck of your life and stuff when I was a kid. But, as a young kid up there, it's intimidating. I had a compass. They used to pick on me. You're never going to see a deer if you're always staring at your compass. And, I didn't want to get lost. I didn't want to spend the night in the woods.
And now this is what you're staring at.
Yeah,
in the woods.
Yeah. It's changed a lot. But, when I was a kid, but, that little bit of a fear of, going over the wrong, ridge or something and spending the night in the woods, you paid attention to everything. And I really did. I look back on that, and I hunt with a lot of different people, and I go out in the woods with them, and they get confused of where we're at, and I can usually pick up a piece of property pretty easy and learn my way around it pretty quick. And I owe all that really to the old guys, especially when I got my small game license. Like, we did do some still hunting and some little pushes. We didn't do like big all out deer drives, but we'd have a couple guys go up and get on the backside of a swamp, and then a couple people would still hunt their way through, and we'd all meet at a certain place at a certain time. And when the radios came out and the walkie-talkies, we started using those a little bit, and little pushes and still hunts and things like that, which we started getting a little more and more success. And there was a lot of logging up there that a lot of the underbrush came in, and if there's food up in the Tug Hill area, there'll be deer. If there's no food, there's not going to be any deer there. It's not like, around here or even around where I grew up, just, 30, 40 minutes away from there. Those deer live in a plot of woods and they don't wander too far. And up there, it's really survival.
Yeah, because they have all the browse in the world, in the suburbs and around here. And there's just browse for days, And,
Yep.
and this year we've got a really strong acorn. Well, last year was a really strong acorn crop. This year it seems a little bit less, but it's still a good acorn crop. So the deer are going to be just spread out. It's going to be hard to find them.
Yeah, and a lot of oaks here. And there's parts of New York that still has a lot of oak trees. You definitely see a difference in those areas with rack size a lot of times.
Yeah. Did you ever from your camp, like in your were you stand hunting, like picking a spot on the ground, not from elevated, but did you ever is that part of your camp tradition? Like that at our camp, that's pretty much all everybody does. They have their go-to spots that have produced year over year, and usually it's like a travel funnel, where deer are going to be going through the rut, and everybody's got their spots on opening day. That's typically what's happening. Nobody's really tracking. I've done quite a bit of still hunting, especially the last decade. I've enjoyed doing that because I think I'm like you. Sitting for a long period of time with a gun in my hand is different. I can sit with a bow in my hand all day, no problem. But yeah, as soon as I have a gun, I just have the itch to start moving.
Yeah, I feel silly when I'm sitting too long with a gun. I can't do it. Are you talking about like hunting camp back when I was younger?
Yeah. Do guys have their spots they go out to and sit for the morning, or was everybody pretty much moving around the woods?
It was a big chunk of property, and initially when I was real little, like none of that had been logged. And there's places I haven't been up, my grandfather passed, a few years back, and I haven't had a camp up there in, I don't know, probably 10, 15 years. So it's been a long time since I've been up there. But the last few years we hunted up there, it had all been logged. And you were riding your four-wheeler into places that, it used to take you all day to get back in there, and then you had to really know what you were doing to get back. And,
yeah,
everything up there with the old-timers, every portion of the land had, its own nicknames, the Cradle Nose,
yep.
the Little Green Swamp,
oh, yeah.
Bulldoze Trail, and everything had its own thing. And, you just learn those over the years of, where this was, where that was, and you talked about it. But no, tree stand hunting, nobody used tree stands back then. Really, I started using tree stands when I got into bow hunting, and I'm scared of heights. I've always have been.
Yeah.
So I've tried hang-on stands. I've tried ladder stands. I don't like any of that stuff. I'm not comfortable. I've used Summit climbers since they first came out, and they were 100 pounds in steel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I use today. That's what I'm the most comfortable in. I can sit all day in it. They're not that heavy. I have two of them, so I kind of strategically move those around as I'm trying to hone in on an area. I don't sit one spot too much anymore.
Yeah.
But back then, no, it was like, hey, I'm going to go up by the swamp and I'm going to go down to this trail.
Or would they sit by the base of a tree or something? That's what I mean. Yeah, like at our camp, that's what everybody does, or they build a ground blind, but that's there for years, and they'll sit at that same tree every year and get success. If you can find a really good spot in those bigger woods like that, that's a good rut funnel, they produce. Like my uncle and my dad's go-to spots weren't too far away from each other, but they probably got a deer 6 out of 10 years, a buck from their spots,
Yeah. I think most of them still hunted the most, I guess, looking back on it. Because when I went with them when I was little, if I didn't put my head up, I'd run right into the back of my dad or my grandfather.
Yeah.
I would follow them, through the woods and just watching and learning and asking questions and them telling me to shut up and all that good stuff. But, yeah, I think it was mostly still hunting. And then you'd find a nice log or a stump and you'd sit there for a little bit and then you'd move around. And but, over time, as hunting evolved and television and, even before the internet, tree stands started becoming popular and, you started seeing more of that. But
yeah, I love my Summit too. I've got two Summits. One's an open shot and one's got the rail. Do you use the open shot or the rail?
No, I'm about 250 pounds. So
yeah. It's a little bit harder to climb that open shot.
I used to have it was like a Cobra, it was called, one of the first ones that had the open, and it's all an ab workout.
Yeah.
I have a Titan and a Goliath, a little bit more room, and, I figure with all my gear, I just feel a little bit safer.
Yeah.
But, I just feel so safe. I always wear my harness. I always have, back in the day when nobody did, Everybody picked on me, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want to fall. And now it's cool to wear a harness. Back then, it was not. Everybody's like, oh, you're being a wuss.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I feel safe. That's what I'm comfortable with. That's what I'm confident with.
Yeah, those things are super comfortable for all day sits.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a lazy boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've gotten into saddle hunting a little bit. Have you done that at all?
I've looked at it. It just doesn't seem like it would be my. I have a routine. It works for me.
Yep.
I like I said, come November, I pack a sandwich and some cashews or whatever I got for snacks, and I don't plan on coming back till after dark.
Let's talk about. So you mentioned that your favorite hunt still today was your first buck.
Yeah.
And what year was that? 91.
It was. I'm pretty positive it was 1991. I was 17. I was in high school. I had permission to hunt this piece of property just down the road from my house. One of the neighbors. I asked him, hey, I mind if I hunt out here? He's like, nope, I hunt out here sometimes, but you're more than welcome to go out there. And it's a big chunk of woods. He had like 13, 16 acres, something like that. It was a small piece. But back then, everything wasn't posted. Like, you knew all your neighbors as long as you weren't, disrespecting somebody's property. There was nobody was like, get off my land type of thing, So, I snuck back in there one morning. I woke up late. You could see when I was walking in. I had a spot that I sat that was up on a little knoll that, I had seen deer in the past. And I was walking in, went up over this creek and coming up over this little knob, and it was fresh snow overnight. And I come up on a fresh rub with the bark right there on top of the snow, and I looked at it, and I took a couple of steps, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm going to walk back here and sit, and the buck was just rubbing here. And we just got the snow, within the last 2 hours. I'm like, and I actually, me and my friends used to joke, I every time I tell a story, I'm like, I said to myself, I'm going to go Benoit on this buck, and I actually met Lanny at the Hunt Stock, New York. And
spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah, he spent a couple hours sitting there just telling hunt stories, and that's just amazing to me. But, back then, I was using his family name. I'm like, I'm going to go Benoit on this. So I started tracking that deer.
So you'd already read those books by the time you were 17.
Oh, yeah. And we had talked about it. You flip through the pictures, all those guys with the red hair and these monster bucks from the Northeast in Canada. And it just seemed like,
otherworldly.
Yeah, mystery to me, but it was cool. And, it was inspiring. And I said, I'm going to go Benoit on it. Why am I walking back into sitting on a knob when a buck just walked through here? So I got on the track, and I tracked and went up, down, through. And a couple hours later, I finally came up with this big growth, an old grown-up field, a lot of old farmland around where I grew up, and fresh bed, running tracks, and I remember, if the deer's running, move faster. So I'm scooting through there, and I followed him for, most of the day. And he just, this big chunk of property is like a huge rectangle, a big square.
So the place you got permission on butted up into a bunch of big woods.
Yeah, I wouldn't say big woods, but
big enough.
It's probably a few square miles.
Yeah.
But, it's all, like I said, old farmland, and you're going to run into a road eventually. And I followed that buck, and it wasn't about size of the track. I knew it was a buck. He made a rub, and I tracked him. I jumped him finally. I hustled through. I followed him, and I came up across the corner of a field where he cut across the field and stayed on him. And I got down in this real thick swamp, and I was moving real slow, and I see legs in front of me, and I could see him sneaking up through that swamp, ahead of me. Probably 100 yards or so. There's no shot. So I kind of started going slow, and I got up to the other side of that swamp, and I was moving, and I caught another glimpse of the deer walking, and then I could see some other deer walking up in these hemlocks, and I'm like, he has turned right. He's basically been doing a circle all day. I was getting close to back where I started, and I'm like, he's going to just keep turning. I know where I am now. I'm going to get up on the other side of this knob, and if he keeps coming this way, he's going to walk out in front of me. So I snuck up around this other side of this knob, and I see a doe come up 30 yards right in front of me. I'm standing there, and here he is, nose to the ground. He was a little three-pointer.
Perfect.
He had his nose to the ground chasing her, and she's staring at me. And I pulled up. My grandfather gave me this old Winchester Model 12 with there's a little BB on the barrel, 12 gauge that shoots slugs. and I could hit a paper plate at like 40, 50 yards. And I pulled up about 30 yards, and I shot him, and he jumped, and he ran up over this knob, and my heart was pounding. I was so excited.
Oh yeah.
And I went after him, and I go up on the top of the knob, and he's laying there like 10 feet in front of me, just doing a little bit of head bob. And then I'm like, I don't know if I want to shoot him again. I was making up, him and Han, if I should take another shot. He looks like he's dying.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he stands up and he starts running away from me. I panic, and I took another running shot at him, and then I just started chasing him. And
Yeah.
He went about.
You ran?
Oh, I was running after him like I wanted to cry. I'm like,
Yeah.
no way I'm losing my first buck.
Yeah.
So I get down there, and my heart's pounding, and everything's going through my mind. And I look up, and he's laying there. And I leaned up against the tree and put another one in him. And I went over and, shot my first buck. And
Your first Benoit style buck.
yeah, I tracked him.
Yeah.
And when I finally realized where I was probably 50 yards from that tree that he rubbed on that morning. I did a complete circle through that whole piece
Really?
of property.
Yeah.
And he just kept circling and circling and circling. And I remember just dragging him back in the snow, and I got pictures. I threw him in the back of this old 82 Malibu Classic 4-door. I threw him right in the trunk.
Yeah.
The trunk open, and I backed into my grandparents' driveway, and my grandmother had come out and took a couple pictures, and I was so happy. I shot my first buck.
Did you send me that picture?
I don't know if I sent that one, but I have some pictures. I think I might have.
Yeah, if you didn't and you can find it, send it to
Yeah.
me. That your podcast will go up a couple weeks from now, so
Yeah.
we've got some time. But yeah, I'd love to put that in there for the history of it for sure. So after that, did that give you the tracking bug like more than before? Was there a stretch of where you just wanted to track after that?
No, it was more of that's something I know I can do, and it is fun.
Yeah.
But like I said, I was 17 years old. I joined the Navy when I was end of that year.
Yeah.
And I left for boot camp right after I turned 18. And, hunting at that point was what it was, throughout my Navy time is what I remembered, as a kid, what I learned. So it kind of stopped my growth of, just being able to hunt. I was pretty busy doing the Navy thing. And, after I think the next time I really came home to hunt was 1996. And I took like 3 weeks leave during gun season. I really hadn't picked up bow hunting that much yet. I had a bow and I dabbled in it, but I came home, everybody was going to be gun hunting, and I ended up shooting up till last year the biggest rack buck I ever killed in my life in 1996.
Out of the Tug Hill camp?
No, this was right around home. My grandfather lived over on a back road, and there was some old farmland and stuff behind there. And my dad and I were talking about this on the drive up. This scent that I used that back then, he had bought. He had went to some show or something, and the James Valley scent. And I don't have any sponsors. I don't have any connection with anything. I have products I like, and I remember he used it. And he'd go out there every night after work because there was a whole bunch of scrapes out on the edge of this old grown-up field. And he was putting that in there, and every day he'd go back, and it was just tore up. And he had been putting that out there, and it was Thanksgiving morning. And we all met over at my grandfather's house, and we were all going to go out and just sit for a couple hours, kind of a Thanksgiving tradition. And he had me go in where that one big scrape was, and he's like, just get back up in there, up in the woods and sit. And it was Thanksgiving. It was freezing cold. And I will say I was home on leave, and we were out partying the night before. I was rough. My one buddy that was supposed to go with us, he didn't even wake up.
Well, that Wednesday night before Thanksgiving is when you get to get back with all your high school buddies.
Oh, and it was.
Yeah.
And somehow I made it up, and it was so cold. It was, in the teens, and there was snow on the ground. It was crusty. And I just remember wandering up in the woods, and I found this little stump up on a knoll, and I sat down on the stump, and I had success already with grunt calls and bleats, and I knew that I made a lot of noise going in, and the theory in my head, and I still live by that. If you're going to make a bunch of noise, you need to do something to make any deer nearby think you're a deer.
You
and not
might
a
as well
person.
imitate a deer. Yeah.
So I sat down and I cleared off the snow on the stump, and I hit my bleat 3 times, and I wasn't sitting there for 5 minutes. and I hear crunch, crunch, crunch coming. Couldn't even see anything. I heard this deer for 15 minutes before I saw it. And at first I thought it was another person. I'm like, man, this hunt's already ruined. I'm freezing cold, and I see the spot coming through the swamp. And he came right up, 25, 30 yards from me, that same old Winchester Model 12. And I put it on the shoulder and shot him, and he dropped right in his tracks. And my dad picked on me because I knew that there was other hunters out and about, and I just unloaded my gun. I just kept shooting. I remember something my grandfather said, you keep shooting until they stop moving. And
Yeah.
At that time, I just came home from the Navy. I hadn't hunted in a few years, and I just remember seeing this buck, and I'm like, he's not getting away. And I remember I hit him three of the 5 shots. I missed him twice while he was there, but really the first shot, I shot him right through both lungs. And,
Yeah. That's awesome.
I got him on the wall, and
How big was he?
He was a 120, 125 inch 8-point. He didn't have much of brow tines. He had real good mass, but at the time, I remember taking him before I cut up my own deer, took him down to the local butchers, and people were coming from all over to see it, and it was pretty cool. And
Yeah, that's awesome.
that was a good get the itch going for bigger bucks.
Yeah.
I went quite a while after that before I really learned how to hunt to where I could start targeting, bigger deer.
Right, before you took it a little more seriously and started scouting a lot more, I'm sure.
That was all luck. I'm sure my bleat did something, but other than that, I didn't. My dad prepped those scrapes, kept the bucks nearby, thinking there was a doe there.
All right, let's talk scrapes and scents in a second. We'll just take a quick break. I'm going to shut that AC off because it turned on.
Okay, sounds good.
This episode is brought to you by onX, the #1 hunting GPS app. The onX Hunt app has been an invaluable tool in my hunting pursuits, whether I'm hunting, shed hunting, scouting, or e-scouting. To support our show and gain access to the best hunting app out there, use code HS20 when signing up, and you'll get 20% off your plan. I use onX to mark rub lines, annual scrapes, stand locations, camera locations, and a lot of other points of interest. For shed hunting, I use the tracking feature, which shows me where I have walked in a patch of woods, but more importantly, it shows me where I haven't been, these little pockets of woods I may have skipped over, and that really helps me to find match sheds that I'm in pursuit of. In Massachusetts, we have to be 500 feet away from a dwelling to release an arrow, or a bullet for that matter, so I frequently will use the bubble feature, which you place a waypoint down on a building, and then you can set your radius bubble to whatever your state setback is, and that'll show you where you where is off limits to hunt and where you are safe to hunt. There are tons of other features I use daily to help me be more successful, which I'll break down in a later video on my channel. But if you want to give onX a try, they're a great sponsor. I would recommend supporting them. Go download onX from the App Store and use code HS20 for 20% off. All right, so scrapes. We were talking about scrapes, and I just want to know how you utilize scrapes in your scouting and hunting. Do you sit over scrapes? That's one of my favorite things to do.
I used to early when I bow hunted. Obviously, if there's a scrape, there's been a buck there. But over time, I kind of adapted to, especially if it's a piece of property that I've hunted, quite a bit. I've learned the property and learned the movements of the deer on the property and things like that. You'll have your, sometimes you'll have scrape lines where there's, a scrape every 10, 15 yards down a logging road. But you have those spots where there's a scrape year after year, the community scrapes, the big ones that, most of the deer in the area are utilizing, or at least scent checking and stuff like that. And I will transition my trail cameras to those spots just to get a better look at, what deer are actually in the area, what bucks are hitting those scrapes. And, that's when you get some of your really cool trail cam pictures where they're racking their antlers, and, you get some cool videos, and, you kind of get an idea of, what else is in the area besides what you've already got on camera. But, I will hunt near thick stuff where those scrape lines are. And, I always try to hunt, near those transition points. Everybody talks about swamps and, thickets, places where big bucks are that it's hard for people to get. You find those spots where the scrape lines meet those, and then you kind of find a good intersecting point of, where you're going to hunt. So, obviously scrapes shows there are at least a buck in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you kind of, trail cameras are a great thing. The cellular cameras, you can get your camera in and you're not stinking up the area every 2 weeks going in and check your cards.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty amazing what technology allows us to do. And, getting all these different bucks on camera can be great, and it can also be frustrating at times too.
I imagine you've got a cell camera or two on your lease, kind of keeping an eye on it before the season, or what?
Right now I'm near one of those scrapes. I put a little food plot in on the one in Western New York, one property I have. I raked out a, 50-yard by 20-yard spot up on top of the mountain there, and put some throw and grow, and just kind of put something there to focus on. And we bring my buddy there. He's got 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters, and they hunt with us during gun season a little bit. An area we can put them up there and sit.
Has that been effective, doing a little micro plot in otherwise bunch of woods?
I get a lot of deer on the camera. This year it's been so dry, it kind of grew there for a little bit, and now my pictures just looks like a big dirt spot with some grass in the background.
Yeah.
But deer are still coming through there. Like, it just becomes part of their routine. I do have some nice bucks that cut through it, and that's kind of where I start. And then, like I said, when I get down there and I'm actually getting into hunting mode, I'll snag my camera, and then I'll kind of scoot it to a spot where I know those scrapes are, and usually they're already opened up, and I put my camera in there, and they're usually cruising through there, so the scent of my camera doesn't usually impact them. I get quite a few deer that are in the area.
Yeah, I've always been curious about that. Like at my deer camp, I've thought, man, it'd be nice because there's not a lot of food where I hunt in Vermont. There's acorns, and that's pretty much it. They just started doing a tiny bit of logging, though, the last couple of years, which makes food. But before they were doing that, I was always thinking, man, it'd be nice to plant a tiny little food plot here. And I wondered how effective that would be in those type of woods.
Yeah, we experimented last year. Like, I did sit near the food plot a couple times. There's a tree there that I really like. It has a nice cover. And I had the first sit last season. I sat up there. It's kind of like, October, like I said, I like to do like some surveillance sits, and then I'll kind of hone in on where the deer are moving that year. And I had that first set, I had 3 bucks come in. First one, small buck came in. He kept looking and looking and looking. I looked to my right, and the small 8-point, just out to his ears. And they started hanging out, and then another buck come in, and they were all over me. I was filming them, and I'm like, oh, this is good. And they kind of wandered through the food plot and walked down and just kind of moseyed off through the woods. And I'm like, this is a pretty good start to the year. 3 bucks on my first set. One, 10 years ago, I would have put an arrow in.
Absolutely.
He was an 8-point.
Yeah.
And, it was fun. And those were coming through there all the time. Like, I just think it becomes, when there was food there, I just think it becomes part of their travel habits. And, I wouldn't say I have, it's not like you see like the hunting shows and, there's 15 deer on the food plot. It's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an old logging road that gets a little bit of sunlight up on top of the mountain that I raked out and, like I said, threw some throw and grow.
What grows out of that? What is the plant?
It had clover and some other things. I tried a couple different brands. It wasn't like a big research project. It was something that, I might as well go up there and just put something there, see if it, put the camera on it and see what it does. And like I said, there was a lot of deer in there. They come in, you start seeing the does and the fawns. And
you utilize Onyx a lot. You mentioned in your email, and it's a big tool for you. What are some of the things you use on Onyx?
Yeah, I think the use of Onyx and or Onyx, or however people say it. I study maps year round. Like, you're obsessed with hunting. You're always looking at different areas. Somebody says, hey, I hunted down here, or there's some nice state land down here. I'll go on and start looking. Just, looking at different areas. And like I said, I lease different properties through a logging company I have. And if there's a new property that shows up on there and, I'm looking for maybe something different, I get bored easily. So when I learn a piece of property and there's another part of the state that I haven't hunted, or if it's an area known for big bucks, I'll start doing just some Onyx scouting and looking at it and going on there and marking spots. And I went to Missouri not 2 years ago and 3 years ago, did a do-it-yourself Missouri trip. And prior to that, I did a ton of research, a whole bunch of different public properties down there, and
Yep.
I kind of honed in on an area I wanted to go, and I found some cabins that were, I mean, you can't imagine how cheap it is to stay for 10 days. Split it with a couple other guys, and I just did a lot of studying, and I kind of hit some of those spots that I initially found on the maps that I thought were real promising looking at the maps. And then, once you get in the woods, you can kind of piece it together. And, I didn't kill a deer either year I went there. I did see two really nice monster bucks. One, I say monster bucks for what I'm used to in New York.
Yeah.
Really nice bucks. And one of them he ended up being a kind of a funky 10-point. A friend of mine that went with us, he ended up shooting him that night, but that buck bedded in front of me at about 90 yards from 9 o'clock in the morning till almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I sat there looking at him through my binoculars.
You probably weren't bored that day.
I did like grunting and bleeding, and he'd bedded. He'd get up, he'd eat a little bit, he'd lay back down. And like I said, you learn, like when the bucks that time of year, they're not moving, they will just stay in an area they're comfortable and they won't move. And I sat there and watched him. And he ended up getting up. He got 50 yards from me, and then he just turned and started feeding his way away. And I texted my buddy. I said, "Hey, he's coming over the hill over towards you." And then right before dark, he put an arrow in him. And
that's awesome.
It was the last day of our hunt. That was pretty cool. But
let me ask you, during that whole day you were watching him bedding, did he get up once and like readjust or move 5 feet or anything? Like how?
Yep. You did, kind of what you hear and you see stuff. He'd get up, and then you're getting ready. You're like, "Oh, here he comes," and he'd
just
get up.
Kind of stretch.
He'd, rack his antlers on some trees and paw the ground a little bit. He'd nibble on some branches, and he'd move 5 yards, and he'd sit back down, and and then I'm just sitting there with my binoculars going, "Come on."
Yeah. And he did that. How many times do you think he did that?
3 or 4 times. He did get up, and he moved about 15 yards. He made a scrape, and then he laid right back down, like 5 yards away from the scrape. And I want to say 3 or 4 times he got up and, stretched and shook and hit the antlers. And it was exciting. It didn't work out for me on that last night of the hunt. But like I said, we had honed in on, I saw dozens of bucks. There's so many deer out there. And, just you're going to go to Missouri. I want to shoot a deer like I see on TV. And, I saw a couple of them, just didn't work out. And
it's interesting because and you've read, that the bucks will bed all day, and that they get up and move and shift small little micro adjustments. But when you get the chance to see it all day, that's a cool experience. And I don't know if you've seen on YouTube the kid that's been doing drone studies.
I haven't
recently. No. Oh man, do you use YouTube much?
Yeah.
This it's called Whitetail Research, and he's a bow hunter out in the Midwest and has been a diehard bow hunter. But he sacrificed his bow hunting seasons the last 2 years to, instead of get out into a tree, he flies a drone every day for the full day, and he swaps the batteries out when the drone comes back. So he has like a minute or 2 minutes where he's not surveilling, but he's got a property with plenty of bucks and deer, and he'll have a buck he wants to watch for the day, and he watches it the entire day. He takes all this data, and it's really cool. You should check it out. But because you actually get to watch a mature buck the entire day and see what he does and how many times he gets up and where he moves and what the wind was doing. It's super cool. I think he's going to be really big, and I think he's coming to Huntstock Midwest next year. I talked to him about it. But yeah, if you're into that kind of thing, check out his channel for sure. You were talking about how when you're looking at either a new lease that might be coming available or going out to Missouri, there's a couple of things, and you're marking points just from your map scouting. What are those things that you're marking? Like, what's your process when you open up to scout a new area via Onyx?
Well, Onyx, I actually, the more I mess with it, the more I learn. And you open it up on your computer instead of just the app on your phone.
Yep.
When you put it on like the 3D view, and you can almost lay it out and see the terrain.
Yep.
I started using that, and I put it up on the big monitor on my laptop, and then you can look at some of the areas. If you might have a big ravine or something that runs through there, and then there's a spot where it's not as deep, and you can usually suspect that those deer are kind of lazy, and they're going to take the path of least resistance. They're not these super creative creatures. They're not out there to exert a bunch of extra energy. So you look for those spots. You look for you obviously swamps are big landmarks. Areas of like thick pines that merge with hardwoods, and just transition points where you would see where they could travel.
Edges.
If it's hilly, if it's like some of the property I hunt now, it's not mountains, but it's real big hills. Those plateaus that are kind of hidden unless you kind of wander down the hill. Bucks travel those all the time. You'd never see them. You'd be up on top, or you'd be down at the bottom, or somewhere. And they travel those different elevations, and you get down there and you'll see runs, or you'll see beds right on the edge where they can see forever. And you kind of find those spots, and then easy ways to get into them without spooking anything out of there. And then you've got a spot where a buck might come up in bed, or even some does come up in bed, and a buck will come up to harass them a little bit. So it's really experience you've had on the ground, and things that you've had success hunting. Like this new property I just picked up, it has some old apple orchards, and then it's got some areas where they've recently logged it, and then it's got some open hardwoods, and then it's got like hemlock swamps, and and I marked a whole bunch of stuff before I even went there and scouted it. And I went there and checked it out, and most of those spots, once you get on the ground somewhere near there, you're like, oh wow, this is I'm definitely going to sit here at some point. And right now that all the leaves are on, I haven't seen the property with the leaves off either. It's a whole different world when the leaves are gone. Even from early October till November, like their travel patterns change. Like some of the spots they're moving around now, you can see, a mile, or not really a mile, but you can see a long ways. And, they're just not going to walk out in the open like that.
Speaking of leaves, do you use that leaf off imagery option on Onyx?
I have a little bit messing around with it, but
I use that a lot. Boy, that shows you the edges.
Yes.
It really shows you some great edges, and it'll help you identify where there's possibly oak trees and stuff. There's also that feature on there with acorn producing or nut producing trees. There's a toggle if you use that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it'll show up as orange on there. And it seems to be pretty accurate. Sometimes you'll see a whole patch if you have that toggled on that doesn't have any orange, and then there's a couple in the middle. And then if you go through the woods, you're like, oh yeah, it's just going through, a bunch of maples or something, and then you get to this oak patch. I mean, it seems to be pretty accurate. I don't know how they're doing it. Probably with like the color of the leaves and some kind of a. But yeah, those two things I use quite a bit, especially if I'm looking at a spot that I haven't put boots on the ground yet.
Yeah, I mean, where I grew up hunting on the Tug Hill, I mean, there's no oak trees up there. I mean, if you have a good beech nut crop, that's what you're going to be. And, food is usually browse, and then it turns into, survival food. So a little bit different. The property out western New York, the property I lease doesn't have any oaks on it, but all the state land around it does. So I was able to, target those oak flats and the different areas where the deer go through. And I actually shot a buck last year during gun season. I was still hunting. He was a 5-pointer. He was perfect deer to shoot, to drag weight from a couple miles back in, and I was really happy to put a tag on him. But I come up over the hill on this oak flat, and there was a bunch of does pawing, and he stood up behind a tree, and I had a couple seconds to make a decision, and I was ready to fill my gun tag, and he stepped out, shot him, and it was all, they were pawing up oak, they were acorns.
Yeah. Let's talk about when you're going to a new spot, your process of finding which tree you're going to hunt out of. What do you look at? Like for me, I'm looking for scrapes. I know you don't hunt them specifically, but what tells you like this is the perfect tree? I'm going to sit here in all your scouting, because there's a lot of guys that listen to this that are new to hunting or getting into it as an adult. So I always like to ask that type of question.
Yeah, I think talking about hunting scrapes, something I've learned over the years that, because like I said, when I was younger, scrape, got to be a buck. But I learned, a lot of the bucks don't even hit the scrapes. They just scent check them.
Yeah, they hit it with their nose and their
Right.
eyes and rubbing their forehead up on the licking
Well,
branch.
some of them don't even go to
Or
the
that.
scrape.
Yeah.
They will come nearby,
Yep.
get downwind of it.
Yep.
And I found that doing that, a lot of times when those bucks are downwind of that, they're downwind of you. And so you kind of try to get strategic on, where you're going to cut that deer off or something. Because if you're hunting the scrape, they're kind of hunting you too, because they're going to smell what's been coming through the area.
Yeah. So maybe you find in that scenario, then you find the trail that the deer are using to downwind scent check that scrape, and you either follow it back or the way he's going and find a pinch point maybe to hunt him there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of strategy what comes into that. But, their nose is their best weapon. You can do everything you want to be scent free. If a deer gets downwind of you, they're going to outsmart you. So
Yeah.
you really just got to play that. And, your stand locations, like I said, I have a lot of different stand locations that if it's a piece of property I've hunted a lot, but I will only go in there, when the wind is right and I know that there's a good chance I'm going to shoot a deer. If you go to the same tree over and over again, especially in some of the places where I hunt to, outsmart a deer, your scent's eventually going to steer them, and they're going to be moving, a couple hundred yards away, traveling another area.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of be strategic, and a lot of the deer you do end up getting or given an opportunity is, the first night you're sitting in the stand, or the first day you're sitting in the stand.
Yeah. And you like hunting intersections of trails, right? Is that one of your things?
Deer trails are good. I've noticed a lot of times, especially in New York where I've hunted, a lot of the heavy trails are used by does.
Yeah.
And then the bucks will usually travel on another trail, 30, 40 yards off of that.
Yeah.
So, but anytime there's an intersection of a trail, those are spots early in the summer. I try to get a trail camera on. You want to get as many highways as you can. If you just put it on one deer trail, you're going to get deer going down that trail. You get a spot where 3 or 4 trails come together.
Mm-hmm.
You get a camera on that, and you got, a busy intersection. And, you look for that kind of stuff. And, yeah, those are always good spots to set up, especially gun hunting, because deer travel where they're comfortable. And, if somebody spooks a bunch of deer over, even if you're hunting on state land, there's other hunters in there, you never know, but they're going to take those escape routes that they always use.
And a lot of times where there's many trails coming in together, if there is a tree with a good licking branch there, that's where you'll find those community scrapes too.
Yep, absolutely. But for tree stands, I know we had a little issue there where we forgot to hit record. I talked about some of this, but I always look for a tree with good cover. And I said before, a lot of the places I hunt, I look for a nice, maple or something that's backed up into a hemlock, and you can get up in there. You have all kinds of cover, and then you have air for even when you have to move or you got to make a little bit of a movement. The more cover you have, the less likely the deer are going to spot you.
And what have you noticed too about fine tuning your locations over the years and making little micro adjustments in your spot?
Yeah, well, a new spot, like I said, you go out, you kind of get an idea of where you think the deer are going to be traveling. And then I hit some spots where I can see a little bit farther, but you can see the edges of some thick stuff and kind of do some surveillance. And then, like I said, you're probably not going to see a lot of deer in bow range, but you're going to see where the deer are traveling and where they're moving. And then you kind of, strategy, you move into those areas where you've seen some bucks traveling through, and then you find a spot where, you can get set up to where they're traveling there. And then you just hone in and you kind of learn the spots that they travel year after year. And like I said, you learn those community scrapes, and you learn where the does are feeding, and you learn where the bucks are bedding, where, gun season is a good time to, you wander through the bedding areas and you jump them and you get an idea where they're hiding, and, you want to set up to where, you're close to those spots without, spooking them out of the area.
Yeah. And it's really just for the new hunters, it's a time investment when you're going into a new spot. And you mentioned when you're using OnX now, you're able to pick out spots that are likely to have sign and beholden deer and bucks because of all the experience that you have, but a new hunter won't have that. So you've just got to spend as much time as you can. And I was mentioning like that little 8-pointer there. I shot that buck, and it was a new area to me because my other spots, it was my go-to spots that I'd honed in on and spent the last 3 years honing in on, didn't have acorns that year, and I wasn't seeing deer. There was nothing in there, so I had to go out and sacrifice some time during the season to scout a new spot, and I had to go find acorns. I knew there were acorns somewhere. I had to go find them, so I sacrificed a couple of hunting days to go find one, and I found the spot, and that's where I ended up shooting that deer. And that spot just had the first, pretty much every day I've ever hunted there. I don't think I've ever hunted in there without seeing something from my stand. You've got a long line of sight. There's a bunch of different terrain features and stuff, and there's a bunch of trails crossing over this one draw. And I knew there's a ton of deer in there, but it's taken me 3 years to really find the optimal spot in there. And it's not a big piece. It's 25 huntable acres. So within that 25 acres, it sounds like it's small and it should be kind of easy to find the best spot. But after hunting it, probably 45 days the first year and 60 days the next year, I realized the tree that I was in, which had trails and it had things that were bringing deer through there, but it wasn't the optimal tree. I mean, you only get that. I was watching these deer constantly using this trail, and I say constantly, it was probably like 35% of the time they were using the one my tree was at, and it was 65% of the time the other one. But you don't get that level of data and that confidence to be like, that's the best trail if you're just sitting there a couple times a year, or even if you just went there 1 year, you don't know if that's enough data. But after a couple of years of that building up, that's where you can really start to fine tune it and make those micro adjustments. And really, I only moved my tree 30 yards, but the tree that I'm in now is, I'm convinced, the optimal tree in that spot. But that all just ties back to time.
Yeah. And you get rewarded. I mean, sometimes you learn a piece of property and, it takes a couple of years to hone in and really, well, you see deer, but, you get yourself in a situation where you kill a nice buck. And when you do all that work and you go in and, it works the first year, the first couple times, you move around, it's rewarding, and it kind of shows that, your hard work and everything you're doing. There's always a whole element of luck that comes to hunting, and a lot of things lead for that buck to get right in that spot and come through that area, days leading up to where he is. But
yeah,
to be in a spot where they're going to consistently travel through it's a good rewarding feeling.
So we were talking about minimizing all the things that can go wrong, right? So that when you're ready, you're in the best position to just make the best shot. And you had mentioned this buck, and it didn't get recorded. So let's just talk about it again. The one that you choked on.
Yeah.
Let's tell that story.
2 years ago on that Western New York property, like I said, we had a lot of beautiful bucks on trail camera. It was promising. We were seeing some nice bucks. One buddy that was hunting down there, he's from Maine originally, and he's seen some really big bucks. He's killed some nice bucks, and he met me one day on the trail when we were walking out that night, and he was shaking. He goes, I just saw the biggest buck I've ever seen in my life. He had a 10-inch drop tine on the right side, and he goes, I couldn't even count how many points he had. And we never even had a picture. We never had a camera picture of that deer.
Yep.
So it was exciting. I kind of moved in on a spot where they were traveling along the edge of this real thick stuff on the state land, and I set up there, and this buck, sure enough, he comes up over this hill. I see him coming. I stand up. I get my bow in front of me. I'm watching where he's going to go. Everything's right in front of me. I don't have to move. He goes perfect. Comes right up through one of my shooting lanes. I'm at full draw. Give him a little blat. He stops. Put my pin where I thought I was going to aim, and I watched my luminant go right underneath his armpit. He jumped and went out about 45 yards and stood there broadside looking at me. And he was, I'm pretty sure he was an 8-point, real heavy. He was way out past his ears. He was a really nice deer. And I was sick, and I, went back to camp, told the story. Everybody's like, yeah, choke, everybody gives you a little bit of a hard time, and, it's part of it. And, I went out the next morning. I left my climber right at the base of the tree, and I went out the next morning and, decide what I was going to do after, the morning sit, and pulled out my rangefinder, which probably should use a little bit more, and I've always been really good at judging yardage. We talked about that before we
Yeah.
hit the record. And, like I said, playing sports and, I can look at the base of a tree and go out and say, okay, that tree's 10, that one's 10, that one's 30. I'm not going to shoot past that tree. And, I've done that my whole life. And, 5, 6 years ago, I did buy a rangefinder before I went out to Missouri because I wanted to be able to shoot a little bit farther, not knowing exactly what I was getting into. And I wanted to, maximize my opportunity out there. And pulled my rangefinder out, put it right where that deer was standing, and it was 33 yards. I judged him at 20 to 25 yards, not even. And it's the first time I really grossly misjudged. I'm glad I missed him clean.
Yeah.
And didn't wound him. But it is for a new hunter. I'm not the type of person, and deer are different. Like the deer in Missouri, they'll stand right underneath you. They'll stare at you. And if you don't move, they just calm down and go about your business. I had 2 bucks come through the first day I sat there, and it's a little 6-point and a little smaller buck, and they literally stood underneath me, stared at me, did the head bob, and then they bedded 10 yards from me for about 2 hours. And they don't do that in New York. Our deer, I don't know what it is, if they've just genetically been harassed so much over the years, but if a deer there sees you and you don't even squint your eyes, I think they can see your eyeballs. They just know you're not supposed to be there. They're gone. And, you just got to minimize your movements. So
Maybe it's because they were hunted by wolves at one point.
Okay, very well could be.
I don't know if there was in Missouri. There might have been, but maybe that's the difference.
I just know other friends that went out to the Midwest. They're not like our deer. You just sit still, they calm down, and they just go about their business. And like I said, I don't have any studies on that. I did experience that when I was in Missouri, and a bunch of deer that I saw. But the deer back home, like if they have any inkling of something's not right, they don't stick around. They're gone. But the rangefinder, set that up. At least mark what your range is and what you're comfortable shooting and what you're confident in, and it'll minimize making a bad shot.
Yeah.
Making a shot that's going to wound a deer. That's the worst feeling as a bow hunter, is not to hit one and not recover it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you probably, weren't using a rangefinder so much because you had a lot of experience. And, I don't know when rangefinders came out. From probably when you first started, it wasn't like a big piece of technology. But for bow hunters these days, especially if you're just getting into it, I would recommend. I mean, that's one of the most important things that I bring into the stand. It's always right within reach. And typically with bow hunting scenarios, you have that developing happening, right? The deer are coming in, and you see them from 50 or 60 yards, and they're slowly coming in, and you have that time to range things. But just like you, when you get to your stand and you're judging the trees and you know what your range is, right? You probably have got that 30-yard tree in all of your shooting lanes, right? It's not just one, but it's everywhere. So you've got this, like, the radius of what you're going to shoot out to. And I do that same thing, but I'll guess a tree, and then I'll verify it with the rangefinder. It's the first thing I do when I get into a new spot, especially. And then if you hunt it over the years, you don't need it because you've got it all dialed in. But yeah, judge it, verify it, judge it, verify it. I usually go out to 40 yards with my outer radius, because I've shot quite a few deer in like the 35 range. But it's whatever and you're comfortable with as a bow hunter. You got to know your own range and what types of shots you want to take. But I'll go out to 40 and typically have a 40, a 30, and a 20 tree, and I try to do that my entire circumference. But I can't remember the last deer that I shot with a bow where I still didn't verify it as they were coming in. I could see kind of the path that he's taking and range a couple of different things. Well, if he stops behind that tree, that's going to be 33. If he stops over there, it's 29. And I'll try to do a couple of different verifications as they're coming in. Of course, you can't do that if it's like the rut and he's chasing a doe, and that's where you can't afford to pick up a rangefinder. But I think in most cases you can, and it'll give that extra peace of mind.
Yeah, that's definitely not in my routine.
Yeah.
I have my routine, but like I said, I do that ahead of time, and then I know my boundaries. And I don't think I've shot a deer with my bow outside of 25 yards. And,
yeah.
I know some people practice, some people are really good. My dad's he picked up bow hunting because I told him I used to see a lot more deer, and he started doing it, and he's always been, the best shot at everything I've ever seen. The first year he got a bow, he went shooting a league with all his friends that bow hunted forever. He ended up winning the league in some New York State qualifying tournament, and I'm like, you never even shot a bow before. This is ridiculous.
That's awesome.
And, but I've never been that kind of shot. Like, I do one pin, 25 yards. I practice within that range. Like I said, when I went to Missouri, I practiced out a little bit farther. I probably should, but I don't like taking those longer shots. I like that up close and personal. A lot of places I hunt, you don't even really have an opportunity to shoot that far. So I'm comfortable with that. I know I got one pin. There's no room for am I on the right pin or in between pins. I know at 25 yards I'm dead on, and at 10 yards I'm just slightly high or whatever. And it built my confidence, so I'm not thinking about a whole bunch of things other than that deer's coming in.
Yep.
I'm already in position. I got my bow in front of me. I'm not moving. I'm just moving with my bow if I have to. And, you're just drawing straight. You're putting the pin there, and you make your shot. And that really is just taking the thought out of making mistakes, like thinking too hard, and it's just automatic.
Yep, and you've been super lethal too. I mean, you've said you've missed or you've not recovered a couple in a long hunting career, but for the most part, you're taking a really good shot every time, and you've been pretty lethal, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've lost some deer. I'm never gonna fool you. There's been some, but and I've recovered some deer that I didn't hit as good as I wanted to, and I was very persistent, and
like that one I was telling you before the podcast, 23 hours to find them, and it was just one extra speck of blood, you know.
I did. I've made some shots where I've hit some limbs. I've also made some mistakes where I'm never gonna blame my equipment ever. Every deer I've missed, it was my fault, no doubt in my mind. And I can go through it in great detail and go, what an idiot. What the heck was I thinking? And, I have hit some, and I've hit a couple that I was 100% sure I heard him crash. And he was a buck I had on camera. I hit him, probably 6-7 years ago now. And he come in behind two does, and the does ran by me, and I knew there was a buck coming the way they were running. So I just started bleating like crazy to hope, because they were out of range. They were about 60 yards. And I'm like, if I just distract him, he's going to think they went this way. And sure enough, he come right underneath me. And I stopped him at 7 yards, almost straight down. And I hit him right where I was aiming. He jumped. He made this loud, nasty noise. And he plowed over logs and stumps and just did that death run. And I'm like, I sat down. I was pumped. I was already dragging this deer.
Yeah.
And I got down. My buddy texted me. He goes, what the heck was that? A deer just ran by me 100 miles an hour. And I'm like, it might have been spooked by the one I just killed, but...
Yeah, you weren't thinking that's the same one.
No. So my one buddy come down. We start tracking it. Blood trail as wide as this table. And it's going. It crosses this logging road. And all of a sudden, I'm heading to where my buddy heard that deer running. I walk by him, and I wave at him, and he goes... I go, this was that deer. And he went down. I called the neighbor, got permission to go over there. He helped me. This deer went probably almost 2 miles and went straight up a mountain. And I was now just getting drops of blood. And that deer never stopped. He never laid down. He did stop bleeding less. I must have been just high over no man's land. That one hurt me for a long time because, I wouldn't have aimed anywhere different in my mind of what I saw and what I thought I did. But bow hunting's tough.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to touch back on you're talking about like your process, and your process isn't going to be what somebody else's process is. You have to define your own process, and it may go against the popular teaching sometimes, but if it's what works for you, it's what works for you, and everybody's going to go through that and find out what it is for them that works for them. But the thing that you said that is the most interesting is that you have to minimize the things that you got to free up your mind a little bit so you're not overthinking when the time comes, because it can be 10 seconds. It could be 30 seconds, but it happens really fast when a deer comes in. You have to decide whether you're going to shoot it and then make the right shot. So it's very important to minimize and free your mind enough that you're not thinking about too many things. So for you, it might be the range finding. You don't have to. You're dialed in. You've hunted that way for a long time. For me, like one of those main things was forgetting about all the scent control measures and worrying about what I'm smelling like right now. That freed my mind up so much that it allowed me to, focus in on the moment more and, do more things in my prep leading up. So I want to talk, and I do want to touch on, remind me, calling, how you utilize calling because you bleed a lot and all that. We'll touch on that. But I want to talk about, like, do you do anything with scent control? Like, what is your whole outlook on your scent and how you're viewing it?
I mean, I don't go out in the woods smelling like I wore my hunting coat in the bar the night before or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I have gone through stages, when scent lock came out, I had a scent lock suit and I worked on all that. But over time, I do bow hunting. I do when I get to camp, or on my way before I go to camp, I'll take a scent-free shower with the soap and stuff.
Yep.
Does it do anything? But I don't want to go out there smelling like, Old Spice.
Yep.
So just try to get a neutral smell on my body.
I still do that,
Yeah.
Like I just don't take it to crazy levels because there's levels to it, Like what John Eberhard says, that seems like for me it's just a little bit too much. I don't want to invest that level of time, but I do take scent-free showers. I wash my stuff in scent-free detergent.
Yeah, I get all the deodorant and stuff I wear to work. That's not near any of my hunting stuff.
Yep.
Like I go to camp, I'll use that scent-free deodorant just so I don't smell like, a homeless person.
Yeah.
And, I do wash my clothes at least at the end of the season, when that scent-free shampoo or laundry detergent.
Yep.
And, I dry it. I don't use the fabric softener that smells. I just kind of keep it neutral. And I put everything away in totes. And, I pull it out at the end of the year. And,
Yep.
But other than that, I hunt the wind. I make, I don't care how much scent-free stuff you do. If a deer comes in downwind of you and they're not completely distracted, they're going to bust you. They're going to win. So, you just got to hunt the wind. And there's times, the deer's coming in here and the wind's blowing this way, but it's been swirling and you're like, please don't swirl right now.
Yeah.
Or go this way a little bit more. And,
Yeah.
That's just part of the game. But, I try to keep my hunting clothes clean. If I did kill a deer and I got blood all over it, I'll run it through a cycle and wash it and, put it back in the tote. But everything goes in totes. I don't leave it out when we're frying bacon at hunting camp and stuff like that. But gun hunting, I'm a little bit more, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
I'll put on the wool and, you're hunting. You're going to hunt the wind anyway. So
Yeah.
But bow hunting, yeah, that's about the extent of it. I do use the shampoo for the scent-free shower, before I go to hunting camp. And when I'm down there, we'll go out and take a camp shower and things like that. But
what are some of the other things in your process, that you've developed over the years, but has just, it might be a little thing that keeps your mind clear. So you got your gear in the right spot or whatever, you're freeing your mind for that shot. What are some other parts of your process you think might help people out?
Yeah, and I think I touched base on it. And I don't know if it was when we weren't recording or I did talk about it, but, one of the things, I talked about Pat Haney and my dad and, some guys that kind of mentored me when I was not a good bow hunter. And, you see a deer, before they're even close enough to see you, stand up, get your feet in the position where you think they're going to go, where you think your shooting lane is.
Yep.
Get your bow up, get your release on, and just use that for cover. And, it's right there in front of you, like I said. And then your movements are small when everything's going with you. If you're swinging your bow across and doing all this stuff,
Yep.
You're going to get busted, especially with, a mature buck is not going to, you're not going to get that past them. You just can't move. So getting in that spot initially, and then just to keep it simple, like I said, if you're in that position, the only motion you are is you're pulling back, you're getting to your anchor point, you're getting your pin where it needs to be, and you're shooting. That's the only movement, and then you got to be strategic on that. If a deer's looking right at you, you're not going to draw your bow.
Yep.
But if he's coming along and your shooting lane's right here, and this is backfired sometimes too, but because deer have a sixth sense, and sometimes what you think they're going to do, all of a sudden at the last second they do something different. But if there's a tree right there and then it's my shooting lane, as soon as their eyes go behind that tree, I'm drawing.
Yep.
And then I'm going to stop them right there. And I think it's important to stop them. I shot a deer once that I tried to stop, and it wouldn't, and it wouldn't, and it wouldn't, and I finally just released my arrow, and it wasn't that far. It was within 10 yards, and it was a liver shot. Just that little bit of movement between when I hit the release and he was moving.
Yep.
It's important to get that map or whatever you do to get the deer to stop. And when they freeze, your pin's there. You do that last check, and then you let it go, and it keeps just everything simple, and you just get into that routine every time. Now, if I see a deer off in the distance and I see it's a spike horn,
Yep.
I won't even pick up my bow. I'll pull up my cell phone and I'll record, and I'll mess with them and do all that stuff now. But if it's a deer you're not sure of, or
a doe,
and
it's in the rut, pick up your bow because
yeah, there's times when it's the real deal this time of year, and if there's movement, you need to be up and ready. You can't be deciding you're going to move when they're 50 yards away. And
yep.
So, it's just preparing yourself to do those same things every time and just minimize your movement and make your shot as simple as possible, because there's a million things going on in your head. You can't be distracted by, I got to die. Some people adjust their pins, and there's all kinds of things. Like, I know what pin I'm aiming at. I know where my range is, and it's just, if a deer comes within that range, I'm pretty confident I can put the arrow where it needs to go.
And that's another one that I've eliminated from my process. A lot of people swear by the sliding pins, but I prefer just to have my fixed pins so I don't have to do that extra slide. And also, if you're using a slider, you absolutely need the rangefinder. That's what the slider's for, So that adds 2 steps for you. If you were going to use a slider, it's like range. All right, slide, and that's too much for me. I like having the fixed pins. And on what you just said too, like I'll stand up out of my summit if I'm in my summit climber, and I hear a deer without even knowing where it is. I immediately stand up. If I can hear him,
same.
You just got to stand up right away. I don't then go right to pulling my bow off. I'll stand up because that's the biggest movement, is standing up. And then if I identify that it's a buck that I'm going to want to shoot, I'll obviously I've got my eyes on him. I'll wait for him to get behind a tree, and I'll lift. And sometimes the lift gets halfway if it's a small tree, and I wait. But you try to always do it when their eyes are looking away from you, but it might be 2 or 3 different steps depending. That's the downside of when you stand up not grabbing and getting ready immediately but I like to verify and that's where I'll see where that deer's going, look far ahead, get the ranges on the shooting lanes that I think he might walk into, and that's why I'm not holding my bow and got my release on at that point. But that hasn't bitten me in the butt yet. Usually they'll go behind something or they'll look back behind them, and when they're doing that,
that's when you make your adjustments.
Your motion. Yeah, but that's super important for people to take it if you're a new hunter. That's one of the most important things, is knowing when to make your big movements, and knowing when to draw.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, a buddy of mine, we were hunting, and his daughter came down, and she was getting into bow hunting. She had her climber, and she was sitting there, and a big 8-point come right up behind her, and she didn't know when the right time to move was, and she tried to make her move, and it just
picked her off so fast.
Oh, she was so upset. We met her up. We always meet up at the same spot up on a trail there because they hike back and I hike in, and she was almost in tears going out of the woods, and we were just telling her, like, that's how you learn. If you don't move, he's probably not going to see you. You might have to let him walk past you.
Yep.
And then you do what you have to do as quickly as possible, and then get into position. But if you move and their eyes are in that direct path, they're probably going to see that movement.
Yeah, and then it becomes a lot trickier too if you have more deer. It's not just a single deer. That gets really tricky because you've got to keep tabs on every one of those deer and where their eyes are, especially if it's a buck and a doe. I've had a doe pick me off before. The buck didn't know I was there, but the doe picked me off, and that'll happen to everybody. But if you've got 4 or 5 does and you got a buck coming to check in on all of them, it gets really tricky. You have to pay attention to every doe, and then I've had a doe looking right at me. The rest of the herd wasn't really alerted, but she was looking right at me, and a buck was coming in. The same scenario I was thinking about, but I knew, she's locked onto me, and this buck is about to enter a lane, and you have to sometimes take that gamble. You're going to spook her, but you do sometimes, if you evaluated all your options and what you can and can't do, you have to just say, all right, she's going to spook, but this is my only shot, and try to do it. And I didn't get that buck. He spooked too, but you have to take a gamble every once in a while too.
Oh, yeah. You're not going to get him if you don't shoot at him.
Yep.
But you got to be responsible on your shot. So there's a million things going through your head, and it's how you calculate it. I mean, I've learned, back in the early days, I'd see a deer, your heart starts pounding in your throat, and you got tunnel vision and the whole buck fever thing. I experienced that when I was younger, and I kind of, as I got into bow hunting and you watch more and more deer, and then you're more like curious of what they're doing, and you can mess with them. You can mess with the younger bucks big time. And if we get into talking about calling and stuff like that, I can talk about a little bit what I do there. But like I said, you watch the deer, you learn them, and you know what you can and cannot do when you're in a stand.
Yeah. The one last thing that just popped into my mind, then we'll get into the calling. That's one of the benefits of saddle hunting. The downside for some people is that it's not as comfortable, like in your instance too, right? Like the Summit is just much more comfortable for a full day, all day sit. But in the saddle, you've got much less movement. You're already standing. You're in your shooting position already, so you don't have to make that standing adjustment. And your bow's right there in the tree, and the tree helps block you because it's in front of you, so that you're using that as your cover. So for new people getting into hunting, I mean, you might as well try. You got to try a bunch of things out and see if it's going to be for you and your process, right? But the saddle makes that, it does minimize your movement. Now you could be the person swinging around too much because it's
right.
You're not just sitting. So as you're waiting for deer, if it's windy, you don't hear them. Deer might pick you off if you're moving around with that rope too much. So again, there's positives and negatives to everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have to do that stand up motion for sure. So let's talk about how you utilize calling, because you use it a lot.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer for bucks. They're looking for love. And I've grunted at deer. And when I was young, the first grunt call I owned, I did grunt at a couple bucks. But really, since then, I haven't had much luck with a grunt call. Doe bleat, I got a bleat can I've had for probably since it first came out.
Just the Primos can?
It is a Primos can.
Yep.
And I'm so afraid I'm going to lose it someday. You can't even read any of the print on it. It's almost all the outsides wore off. But watching deer, and I've learned, like they say, you don't make too much noise, don't call too much. I usually don't blind call.
Yep.
But if I see a deer off in the distance, and especially if I know it's a buck or it seems like a buck, and it's walking or whatever, I just start hitting the can. I don't stop until that deer stops and is wondering what's going on.
So you'll keep doing it until
I get its attention. And then if that deer stops and its head turns, then I stop, because now it's got my attention. And a lot of times, if a deer's 180 yards, 180, 70 yards, way out of bow range, especially if I know it's a buck, then I'll take my can behind my back.
Yeah.
And I'll do it a couple times lightly.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many times they'll hear that and they'll think it's getting farther away, and they'll turn and they'll come right into you. And with young bucks, I do it every year. I get, those spikes and 4 points.
Oh, yeah, it's fun to play with them.
I'll have them come in, and then I'll have them just about out of sight, and then I'll mess with them again. I'll get them to come back in. And, I have a lot of fun with that. You're educating them a little bit, maybe, if they do end up coming down, getting downwind to you. But it's just a lot of fun playing with them, because then when you get a big buck that comes in and, they're going to hit a scrape line that's, 60, 80 yards over, or a spot along the thick stuff. Like I said, I've had big bucks cruising along, ridge lines or something, and I used to, you kind of feel helpless, like you just want to
Yeah.
reach out there and tell it to come here, and
Yeah.
and I've hit the bleat can and they're not doing anything, and all of a sudden, like, they'll hear it and they'll stop, and once they do that, then I'm like, okay, now they're looking and listening. You see their ears going, but then they're curious, and you don't get them always to turn. Sometimes they'll stop, listen. You do that, they'll stomp their foot a little bit, but they were already headed somewhere. You don't turn them all, but a lot of cases, you get them in, and you don't get every one of those bucks, but you'll have a close encounter. They'll come in really close to bow range. The problem with that is now they're looking for a doe.
Yeah.
Now they're looking for something going on, and if that's not there, they're a little more alert.
Decoy might come into play there.
And I've thought about that. I've never used a decoy, but it's just one of those things that, when you're calling and you can see them and they're not even doing anything, it's because they're not hearing it or they're not processing that's something. So I tell people, lay on that can, just keep doing it, get it up in the air, so you're not flailing your arms, but until they stop. When they stop and look, they're going to make a decision whether I'm going to go investigate that. If you don't, usually when a buck's cruising and their head's out and their neck's swollen, they're going to a field edge or wherever the hell they think the does are. And it's sometimes you can change their mind and they can go jump into a chase that's not really happening.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that when a buck is just covering ground, and especially if it's like a super crunchy day or if it's really windy, they can't hear a long ways while they're moving. They're making a lot of noise themselves. So, yeah, I've tried when I've seen a buck just marching, going somewhere, and tried to get them to come in. It's interesting. I have a can call, but I've only ever used the can blind calling. Every once in a while, I'll tip it a couple times as a blind call. If it's really quiet out there and I know the sound's going to travel, that's when I've used it. But I haven't used it to try to stop a deer moving. I always turn to my grunt or rattling. But I'm gonna try that this year.
If a buck is cruising and he's looking for does, you're telling him there's a doe. I mean, and I've even, if I'm in like one of those hemlocks or something, and he's looking and then he starts to go again, and I get him to stop again, and you've heard bucks chasing does. Like it sounds like the woods are on fire. Like there's nothing quiet about it. I'll start running my bow rope on the ground, and I'll start breaking branch. I try to do anything for them to think that there's a chase. Yeah. And, a lot of times they'll come right in. And younger bucks will definitely come in. They're curious creatures, and, they're looking to find love for the first time sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And this year, Massachusetts has a new law that you can use decoys. We were never able to do it before, but this particular spot that I've been thinking about as I'm walking through a lot of these scenarios, that spot where I killed that little 8, it's a small patch. There's places that's illegal for me to hunt, the bordering property. I can't hunt, so I have to draw deer off of that if they're over there. They have to get over this stone wall. And I call this place the Vortex because there's just so much opportunity in there and so much happening all the time. And I see tons of rut chasing. I listen to, I've had 2 different bucks snort wheezing under me. I mean, I've seen bucks fighting in there under me, 3 of them at a time sometimes. Like, there's just crazy action in here. The only downside is a lot of it's happening where I can't hunt. I can't release an arrow over there. I sit about 30 yards off of that stone wall. And so if I see one cruising over there, I'll rattle, I'll grunt, and it does get them. But sometimes you're doing it as loud as you possibly can, and that deer makes no change in his behavior. And I think it's just because he can't hear it because he's walking. Yeah. So a lot of times I will wait until they stop and they're looking the other way, and that's when I'll do whatever I'm doing, rattling or grunting. And it gets them to come down, at least make some progress towards me, but then they look out into where I'm hunting, and it's open where I'm hunting, and it's thicker on the other side. So they're just coming to look, and I think it's going to be really good to try the decoy this year. I already got one delivered a couple days ago to my house, because I think that's the extra thing they're going to need. They need to see the deer over there that made that noise to get them to come over that rock wall.
And I hear, especially young bucks, I see a lot of chasing, a lot of bucks grunting, and I've experienced it. I mean, they sound like a little pig.
Yeah.
And it's not.
It never sounds like the grunt tube.
Well, you try to make the grunt crew sound like that
Yeah.
once you've heard them.
But I've still never found one that sounds like the actual grunts they make when they're on the trail of a doe. You know what I mean? It's like I haven't heard anything that actually makes that exact sound.
You know, I see people hunting with those little pig dolls they sold at Walmart or something that they were using to make the like little oink sound.
Yeah, my daughter's got one of those, and I've thought about that. I didn't know
One of-
anybody else
One
uses
of the
it,
Facebook sites, I think it might have been one of the New York hunting pages. People kept posting pictures of that pig in their tree stand.
Yeah, it's just a squishy pink pig. Yeah. I've thought about that because she plays with it all the time. I'm like, that almost sounds more realistic to what I know they sound like.
But I've just never had a lot of success grunting. I know some people do. I know, like, actually up in the Tug Hill when grunt calls were first becoming popular. Guys up there, and, you know, I had grunted in a couple bucks, and you get them, like, right before dark. You'll see a deer moving, and all of a sudden they come charging in. But the bleat, you know, late October through November, like before gun season and during archery season, the bleat has just always worked for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that for sure this year. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about that is, so after you're doing it until you get his attention and you see him start to move, and then what is the time or the change in his behavior, body language? When do you go behind your back to do that? Is it after he's covered half the ground and maybe it looks like he's, stopping to consider? Like, when do you go back behind your back?
I will do that once he's paying attention. I don't want him to think it's as loud as it was when he just heard it.
Yeah, but you do it like right away. As soon as you notice that he pays attention, you'll put it behind.
Yeah, if he's looking, I don't want to move. I'll just go and I'll do one or two behind my back.
Yeah.
And just kind of make it sound like it's a little farther away.
Yeah, so don't put too much time between them.
No.
Between the loud one and the
that's
soft
the one that's going to make him feel like,
oh, she's already making ground away from me.
She's going that way, yeah. And like I said, I'm not a professional hunter. This is just stuff I've observed and done. And like I said, I brought some big bucks in doing that. And, you can sit there and mess with young bucks throughout the entire deer season doing that. And like I said, you're watching them and you're just learning what you can and cannot get away with. And, I've done things calling that, deer just look up and gone.
Yeah.
Too. So, I'm not going to do that again. Rattling. I've had some friends that did a lot of rattling, and I know some folks that have killed some deer rattling. I'm sure, like out in the Midwest and some of the places where there's just tons of giant bucks that are constantly competing, it would probably even be a little more successful. I did rattle in one buck. It was an 8-point I killed with my bow, and it was just one of those days you could hear forever. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to mess around a little bit. So I did a little bit of rattling, and I got settled in, and I wasn't even paying attention. I heard a branch behind me, and I looked, and this 8-point was coming in, neck swollen, like he was coming in ready to fight. And
yeah,
I quickly grabbed my bow, spun around. I had one of those trees. I had a hemlock in the back, and he came out at 20 yards and shot him right through both lungs.
Yeah,
he ran off like 60 yards and collapsed. And
awesome.
I contribute that to rattling. Maybe he was just heading that way, but I just had done a rattling sequence like no more than 5 or 10 minutes earlier than that. And
yep,
like he was coming in, like looking around, neck swollen, and I was like, oh, I can say I rattled in a buck now, but
yeah,
just not a lot of confidence for me in doing that. I tried to rattle when you see deer, and usually they just get really curious, and I guess they don't see the deer fighting, so they go the other way.
Yeah, the problem with rattling is that every deer's personality is different. It might be a buck that doesn't want to fight, or there might be a couple of bruisers in the area. Like if it's a subordinate buck, that you're watching, maybe it's like a nice 120-inch 8-pointer that you want to shoot, but there's a couple of bruisers around that have bullied him before. If you rattle, they might not want to come into it. But with the doe bleat, they're not nervous around a doe at all, so you have no downside to doing that.
Yeah, and like I said, all this is my experience. Like, you can see deer way off in the distance. You can't even tell if it's a buck or a doe, and you do that, and if they don't come to the rattling or they quickly scurry off, I just haven't had a lot of luck or experience with it, so I don't do it that much because the last thing I want to do is spook the deer. I want to try to get them to come closer.
Yeah.
And the bleat is just, like I said, it's no harm, no foul, but a buck is looking for love, and you're giving him
Yeah.
the whistle.
Yeah, without a fight. Yeah, because that's one of the things I think about too. If they're looking for love, the rattling really signifies to them there's two bucks competing for a doe right now.
Right.
Maybe I got to go in there and see who they are, and maybe I can compete. But yeah, that's at least it's not the path the easiest, the path of least resistance for a buck. They'd rather find a doe without two bucks already competing for her.
Right.
And then another thing that I've tried, I don't know if you have, is snort wheezing.
I have done that. I don't have a snort wheeze thing. I've heard it on TV. I've seen it. I've actually heard a couple bucks do it. Like you're sitting in your stand, it's almost dark, and you hear deer moving in around you, and you can't see them anymore, and it's still dark.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I've had that happen twice, that there was like multiple deer moved in, and they were challenging each other, and I was like, holy crap, that's what it sounds like. I never, I've only heard that on TV. And then I've had scenarios where I've had deer come in at right before dark, and it's getting harder and harder to see. You only got 10 minutes left of shooting light, and I've tried it. I've just kind of I've done my own version of it at that point, and it's never worked for me. But like I said, I've luckily just in weird, unique scenarios where I've seen that, where there was a couple bucks, but it was usually right at dark, and it was like the deer were moving in right before I was going to climb down, and I just got to experience what the deer do when you're sitting at hunting camp.
Yeah, it's been my last resort thing to try when I see a buck cruising that I want to come in, and the rattling isn't working and the grunting isn't working. Now I'm going to be trying your bleat tactic, because I do like that, and I've never done it before, so I'm going to try that. But the last resort after those two didn't work is doing the snort wheeze, and that has on a couple of occasions gotten them to finally pay attention and start coming in. Again, it's going to depend on the buck's, his where he sits in the herd. Is he the dominant buck? Is he subordinate? All of that's going to make a difference there, but it's worked. And the same thing you like to do is play with younger bucks. I'll test it out on them too. Or if I'm walking into my stand or out of my stand and it's midday, and I jump a buck, and I know it's a little buck, but I jumped him and spooked him, and he just went up over onto this knoll, I'll sit there and I'll make a scrape with my feet, and then do a snort wheeze, and they always come right back. It seems like when the few times I've done that where I've jumped a buck and I know it's a buck that I don't care to shoot, but I want to play with them, that works. So I would try that, and maybe just have some fun this season and try snort wheezing when you've got a young buck that is by himself in the area. See how he reacts to it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's pretty cool. There was another thing that we were just talking about right before the snort wheeze, and I lost my train of thought on it now. That was almost a snort wheeze right there. Yeah. So when you've got a mature buck coming in, that's what it was. Knowing the age structure and the different bucks in the area and how important that can be too. Once you get to that next level where you're reading the woods enough, you've got enough knowledge, but knowing what buck it is in the herd that is approaching and how he relates to the rest of them in the herd can be super important. Have you noticed any of that in the places that you hunt quite a bit?
A lot of the places I've hunted, and like I said, since I moved out to Western New York and my trip to Missouri, a lot of the places I've hunted, you get some nice bucks on camera, but there's not a lot of them. New York is tough for big bucks in a lot of the areas. So the real big bucks, when you do, I've got, many years of, 2 or 3 crazy deer. I got one with drop tine. I had daytime pictures of him. I had all kinds of pictures, but none of us ever saw him hunting. I don't know where he went, what he did. He'd be in the area in front of our trail cameras, but he just eluded us. And so I haven't seen a lot of interaction with that, but I have seen a big 8-point come in chasing a doe, and I've had, another bigger, seemed like an 8 or a 10-point come in and challenge them, and I've seen them have standoffs and the interaction between each other like that. I've had a couple opportunities like that. They're only within 50 yards, and usually the doe will take off, and then the bigger buck will chase after, and it's all over, and
Yeah.
you just have a quick memory. But you know, we put names. You know, some people frown. You know, we don't name our bucks and stuff like that. But you know, when you're hunting with a group and you're hunting the same piece of property for a while, you know, if you
Yeah, it's just like naming your landmarks.
yeah, well, you get a couple deer that have something unique. You know, we'll just call it something, and you know, and then if somebody sees it, we're like, you know, I saw this one deer, and I did kill one of the deer we had named one time. That was the heaviest buck I've ever shot.
What was his name?
He was turkey foot. I got some pictures. I sent you a picture of him. He was a 191 pound deer, and you know, in Oswego County, New York, that's a big buck.
That's a big one.
He had some kind of damage on the side of his face, and the one side of his antler went straight up. He was real heavy too, because he was only a 4-pointer when I shot him. He had lost that one side.
Yeah.
But it went up, and it just had 3 points sticking out. It looked like a turkey's foot.
Yeah.
That's what we called him, and I ended up killing him mid-October. He came right through in front of me. I actually almost had that on video. That's back when I used to try to video my hunts, and he would have been the first buck I ever had on camera, but I completely screwed that up, so I have an edited video of me filming a bunch of oak leaves, and you can hear me stop him, my arrow hit him, and I got none of it on video, but it was my blooper. But yeah, he called him turkey foot, and he actually lost the side that looked like a turkey foot. It had fallen off. It was so damaged on that side. But yeah, he was a heavy deer. He was only 4 points on one side, but body-wise, I didn't always weigh all my deer there, because it's not like Maine where, you know, the 200-pound club. And I said, this is the biggest deer. My dad was out there, you know, helping me drag him, and we ended up getting a neighbor out there with a tractor and helped us get it back to the truck. He was heavy. I got him on a scale. He was 191 pounds.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you don't film anymore, or what?
Use my cell phone mostly. I have like a camera arm, and I have a camcorder, and
that's just one of those things that gets into your process.
It does.
You know,
I got 2 doe kills on video that I self-filmed. I used to play around and do all that stuff, and now it's, you know, I was in the Navy for a long time. We talked about that at the beginning. So when I first retired from the Navy, and I was making up for lost time, and I was just trying to do everything, and now I've kind of settled down, and I know exactly what I expect out of hunting and what I get out of it. And you know, I video a lot with my phone. You know, if it's a buck or a doe,
that simplifies it.
And I'm not going to shoot it. You know, I take all kinds of video, and you know, I edit it, and you know, I make little short videos and stuff like that. But if it's a deer, I see it and I'm going to shoot it, I'm focused on making a good kill, and that's it.
Where do you put those videos? Are they online anywhere?
I share them on my page. I did have a little Facebook page I had for my little handle. That it used to be my boat's name, and I kind of made some apparel and stuff. And
what's that? What's the name?
Foul Anchor Outdoors, Foul Anchor Sportsman. I got a little logo and stuff. I had a Facebook page. I kind of stopped posting on that. I just did everything on my own page. But, you know, I share stories. I used to go live when I was hunting a lot, and, you know, video deer and everybody making comments and stuff.
I like doing that when you know you're not going to shoot them. Go live every once in a while.
A lot of the places I hunt, you don't get good cell phone service, so you can't do that. But some of the places, you know, you're up on top of those hills, you get enough service, you do that. But, you know, I have fun with it, you know, especially, you know, you show other people, like, you know, look at all these deer. You guys got to get out there and do this.
Yeah.
And but you know, if it's a big buck or it's during the rut, you know, I kind of get into serious mode, and you know, it's a game. It's fun. It's exciting. I love venison. I'm torn. That's why, you know, gets later in bow season, you know, and I get a decent 2.5-year-old 8-point or something.
Let those standards just roll right down.
I'm not one of those like I'm gonna hold out to the last day. Like I like venison. And my family ate venison, and you know, I eat it throughout the year. So I like to have 2 deer in the freezer, and you know, some years I get more, then I share it with other people, and you know, try to take care of folks. But you know, I'm torn. You know, that trophy, and what's a trophy? You know, I've killed some deer that weren't as big as I wanted to shoot, but the hunt was so cool.
Yeah.
You know, like I called them in, and they came in and did exactly what I wanted to, and you know, I was committed to, hey, if this deer comes in range, I'm going to take a shot. And, and you know, those hunts are fun because it's just the excitement of the rut and everything going on, and then there's bucks that I would have shot that you know it's early in the season, and you pull that trigger, you're done, you know, until gun season. So
yeah,
I like hunting more than I like just shooting the first deer that I see too. So
Exactly.
it's such a balance. And in New York and the places I hunt, it's tough. I mean, I'm not saying there's people out there that kill monster bucks, consistently, and you can do it. And there's a balance for me, and I've been fortunate enough to, I'm starting to shoot, mature deer, fairly consistently. And like I said, I talked about before, I don't think we recorded that. I shot a opportunistic 330-pound bear that made the New York State record book there.
Oh yeah.
2023, and that's the year I choked on the big buck. And
last bear you're going to shoot, though. Possibly. But again, you never know, because a scenario might happen.
It might.
Where you're like, well, this story is too good, or you're hunting with somebody and you want to share it with them. The standards constantly will change throughout a season depending on who you're with, where you're with, and what happens. Like last year was the first year I didn't kill a mature buck in quite a while. But it was the first day of gun season. I'd been sitting in a tree for like 45 days, and it was gun season. I started in a tree, and it feels weird. I was in a saddle with my gun, and I was like, this is weird.
I can't do that.
I passed like a little 8-pointer that morning. I could have shot from that, and it was so windy and so cold. I was like, I got to get down from my tree. It's gun season. Got a gun in my hand. And my destination was to go change some batteries in this trail camera that had been dead for a while, and I knew it was in a really good spot, and the hunt on the way there would be good. So it was super windy, so you couldn't hear any walking. So I just still hunted over there and got to the trail camera. There's so many videos on there that it takes a long time for the pictures to load onto my phone. Like it was like a 20-minute upload or something. So as it was uploading, I sat down and I was like, I'm going to eat my lunch. It was 12 o'clock or 12:30 by then. So I was sitting in a good spot, eating my lunch, and I had never killed a deer or seen a deer while having a lunch break before. But during this break, 2 bucks. I don't know if they were pushed by something, but came down the funnel I was overlooking. And I said, you know what? This is good enough for me. I've never killed one while eating lunch before. I'm going to shoot him. Yep. He was a nice little 8-pointer, but I got meat in the freezer, and it's just, you're not going to be locked into whatever your standard is. Things might change throughout the day. And then that one I shot with when my dad and my uncle came down here. I don't get to hunt with them very often anymore. And, it was my uncle's first time in Massachusetts hunting. And that buck came out, and I said, I want to share this experience with them while they're down here. And I shot him. He's a nice deer, but I told you, and kind of in hindsight, I wish I'd let him get a little bit older. But in the moment, it was really fun to share that experience.
Yeah, there was a point in my life that every buck, if I saw a buck, he was never going to get older.
Yeah, exactly.
And then like you said, you grow and mature and evolve. And like I said, the people I hunted around, none of them were trophy hunters. So, I kind of something that I evolved into. And as I got, more proficient at how I was hunting, I started up in the challenge. And I love it.
Just like ground hunting is a new challenge too. Have you done any of that with your bow? Like to continually up, if you go to the next level or whatever, you want a different challenge. Ground hunting is pretty fun with your bow.
Yeah, I haven't spent any time doing it. I have tried to make stalks and stuff before, just because I was walking out for lunch and you see a couple deer and you're crouched down and you try to make it happen. I've never shot a deer on the ground with a bow. I did miss one in hunting in Virginia, which that buck was probably about 75 pounds, maybe, if that. Those deer were tiny.
Yeah.
But there was no trees really where we hunted in this place, and it was an archery only. And you'd see all kinds of small deer, and this buck come out. I was hiding behind a bush, and I drew behind the bush and stood up, and he's staring right at me. And just as I started to hit my trigger, he was already moving, and my arrow went right where he was standing, and that was the only deer I think I've ever shot at on the ground.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't, just because I have a routine. I love my climber, and I kind of already know how I'm going to tackle the season. But I'm with you too. Once gun season comes around, I might sit opening morning, especially a lot of the places I lease border state land. So I'll just sit on that property instead of hunting the state, and hoping that if the deer aren't just naturally moving around that morning,
they'll get pushed in there.
Somebody over hunting state might move something over to us. And usually opening day, since my kids are old enough, I save that for my daughters. So they're usually sitting with me or near me, and I don't want to shoot a deer opening day. I want to hear them shoot.
Yeah. And like you said, you shoot one opening day, your season could be over.
Yeah, for gun, but usually
gun,
I've already been bow hunting for 2 months, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I will say, my oldest daughter shot her first deer back in 2000. I think it was COVID year. And
is this the one you're going to her game tomorrow?
Yeah, she's a senior in college now. She plays volleyball, and she was hunting with me. It was after opening day, and nobody was at the camp I was at the time. And we went up. We had the whole hill to ourselves, and we kind of still hunted our way all around. And I would say, okay, hey, go up this logging road, and I give her directions, and I say, I'm going to go up here, and I'll meet you. And we got almost all the way up to the top of the hill. It's a pretty high hill as you hunt up it. And I was going to go up to this thick stuff where deer always bed up on the backside of this hill. It's real thick whips. And I had her set up where I knew they would escape if I moved something out of there. And I wasn't even up around the bottom side of the other to even get up there yet. Yeah. I hear it was shotgun there then, and she had a little 870 with a scope. And I hear, and I'm like, that had to be her. So
that's got to be the greatest.
I didn't even have cell phone signal. I had to hustle up to the top of the hill, and I'm like, was that you? And she just sent me this text like, yes, I got it.
Isn't that such a great feeling?
And I was so excited. And I'm like, I'm telling her to calm down when I'm the one that was.
Yeah.
I was so excited. So I moved through. I'm like, sit still. I said, was it a buck or a doe? She goes, it was a doe. There's no antlers. I said, all right, make sure your safety's on. Did you pump the shot? She was like, yes. I said, all right, I'm still coming through here. If a buck comes out, you can still shoot a buck too. And I got going through there, and I could see her down at the bottom sitting there. And she saw me, and she's like waving, and I'm like hustling down there, and she's like FaceTiming with one of her friends. And
awesome, yeah.
So I get down there, and she's like, I saw it go down over here. I said, what do you mean? I go, you're going to show me where the deer was standing. You're going to show me. So I made her walk up there. She's like, Dad, I know where it went. And I said, nope, let's go up. So we go up. I go, where was it standing right here? I go, okay, there's hair and blood. I said, let's follow it. I made her track it. We get down there, sure enough, it was a little yearling doe, and it was laying there. And I go, make sure it's dead. I go up, she touched the eye with her tip of her barrel, and I was more excited than she was.
100%. I've never had it with a kid yet. My kids are too young, but you get a similar feeling if you mentor somebody, you get somebody into hunting, and they get their deer, and then every deer they get after that, they send it to you. You get that. You're so excited for it.
She made a perfect double. It was about 60 yards with a 20 gauge. Rifle.
That's a good poke for
rifled barrel with a cantilever scope mount and a nice little. I think it was a Nikon shotgun scope or a muzzleloader scope on it, and she made a perfect shot and went. It was a small deer. I made her. She got it. She got right into it. Got all the guts out. All I did was talk her through it, and then we had to drag uphill to get to the closest 4-wheeler trail, so we could hike all the way back down and get the 4-wheeler.
Did you make her drag it all the way up the hill?
I said, I got the guns. I carried the guns up to this. I sat on a log, and I watched her. Like I said, the deer was probably 75, 80 pounds.
Yeah,
at that.
Still an uphill drag.
And she dragged it all the way up to the 4-wheeler trail, and I was never so happy in my life. That was better than any deer I've ever shot.
Oh yeah.
And even though there's not a lot of meat, you could cut that deer with a plastic spoon. It was so good.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you did that is important, and I haven't done it all the time, but if I'm with somebody and it's their first deer, even if you see the deer fall, it's important to go and get on the blood trail as if you didn't, just so you can get that experience, because you can learn some stuff. I shot a deer a couple years ago where I saw him fall too, but I wanted to go get your arrow first, so you're at the beginning of the blood trail anyway. And I was like surprised there was absolutely no blood all the way up to where he died, and that tells you that in the future, don't give up on a deer, even if you have a gun, because this happened countless times out at deer camp. Somebody shoots, all right, I'll come over and help you look, and then you're talking to your cousin, and he's like, oh, I haven't found any blood yet. I've been looking for a half an hour. That doesn't mean that deer's not dead, because I've seen it now, firsthand with a deer that I saw drop. There was zero blood. Sometimes you just hit them in the spot and it clots up, or it stayed in there. It wasn't a pass through, and a bullet can get lodged in there sometimes. So you really gotta do your diligence no matter what.
And I've been adamant. I've went back out. You know, I told you my dad's one of the best shots I've ever seen in my life. And there was a year up in the Tug Hill. We went up hunting. It was fresh snow, 8 inches of snow.
Sound a little bit like Lanny Benoit over there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's a good shot.
Picking up a new thing and then getting really good at it right away is a natural.
Shooting, like, I can't, guns that I struggle with, I'm like, you just sight it in and I'll make sure it's good for me. Because, like, I'll waste a whole box of ammo back in the day. I'm better at it now, but, like, he'd have it sighted in a second. But we were up there in the Tug Hill hunting, and fresh snow. And it was kind of one of those days we were going to go out, see if we get on some tracks, see if we could do some still hunting. And, you know, and we spread out over this big chunk of woods up there. And I don't know, it was like within the first hour, I was down kind of standing by this little creek because we knew the property a little bit, but nobody knew where we were going to end up. We were just off and hunting, and I think we had the radios back then. And I hear a shot, and I'm like, waiting. And, who was that? And Dad goes, I just shot. Buck stood up out of his bed, and we're waiting. And you're like, do you need some help? Do you need some help? He's like, no. And then so we're waiting. So I'm just kind of, we're all sitting, you know, maybe some other deer spooked, and, you know, we weren't all that far apart. And all of a sudden, he radios us back. He goes, I just walked over to the bed. There's nothing. No hair, no blood. And I'm like, okay, that's not like you.
Yeah.
We hunted the rest of the day. We all met way back in the woods and, you know, followed an old logging road back. And I told him, I said, Dad, I know you said you looked for that deer, but if he stood up, you know, within 100 yards of you out of his bed and you put your scope on it, that deer's dead.
Yeah.
He's like, I looked, we can go look. And I said, show me where you're, so he went over where he stood, and he goes, I was standing right here. And I go, where was he? And he goes, the deer was over there. He goes, when I pulled the trigger, though, a bunch of other deer took off and a bunch of snow fell off the trees, so it was kind of deceiving. And I said, well, you stand here, let me go over there. So I go over there, I'm looking, I'm like, okay, there are some beds, but I'm looking, and I start circling a little bit, and I look over like 60 yards or 30, 40 yards from where he was pointing, and there's a deer dead in its bed. Yeah. He was a rack buck. He didn't have brow tines.
So he just dropped right where you shot him.
He shot him right in his tracks, but when all the snow fell off the trees and the other deer took off when he shot, he got.
It's hard to remember which
got
one.
Disoriented, but I know how he shoots, and like I've seen him shoot deer running wide open right through the heart. I mean, like, he just never missed.
Yeah.
Like, if he pulled the trigger, I know we were going to be dragging a deer. And I wanted to go back, and like I said, I go over there, and then he's laughing. He's like, I can't believe this deer's over here. I'm like, he never even got out of his bed. He fell right in it. And we ended up dragging that deer out. And like I said, he was a rack buck up there, which was nice. He just, some of the genetics up there, they don't have brow tines, and he was a 6-point.
Yeah.
But that was fun. That was a good hunt, and it was another one of those things. Like, if you're confident in your shot, you have to go, and you know. And sometimes you got to get help. Like, what you see might not be what really happened.
Yeah,
it's good to have instincts on, you know, where you think a deer will go. You know, and you know, some people are bloodhounds and some people aren't. But you know, I've prided myself on. A lot of people call me when they wound a deer, and you know, I've gone out to try to help them, and I've recovered a lot of them for people that, you know, they just, for whatever reason, they were missing the details.
That's another really fun part about hunting, is the I enjoy that too. I've had friends call me, and it's really fun to go do that. I get just excited to, even more excited sometimes, to track somebody else's deer and help them with it.
I mean, I always make them go back, like, show me where you were, where was the deer. Because I went out too, and they're like, yeah, the deer was right there. And I'm looking at them, and it's like nothing but brush.
The shooting lane doesn't look right.
There's nothing but brush. I'm like, you shot through this stuff? Like, okay, I'm not too confident in this. Or, oh, yeah, you know, I got, you know, recovered some you don't. And, you know, deer are tough. You know, I've seen, you know, I wounded one of the ones I lost. A week later, opening day gone, that buddy Pat Haney was out sitting not too far from where I hit this one buck, and he was he only had 5 points because all his points were broken off. But he was 18.5 inches wide and heavy, and I thought I killed that deer. We tracked him for 2 days, jumped him a bunch of times, but whatever it was, it just wasn't, well, I know what it was after, because Pat shot him opening day,
So you found your broadhead?
and I wasn't hunting there that weekend.
Oh.
No, but I hit him through a little bit forward. I cut the artery in his front leg is why
Yeah.
he bled so bad at first. But it just went through the front of his brisket and opened him up. And when Pat shot him, he sent me a picture of him. And he goes, "Here's your deer." He was almost completely healed,
Yeah.
and he ended up shooting him, a week later. And they're tough animals. If you don't hit a vital, unless there's a bunch of snow and predators, they recover. They're strong.
Yeah. Yeah, and they'll when they get shot, they'll go like some of the deer. This one here that I had a bad shot on him. I hit a branch and ended up going into his shoulder and breaking his shoulder. But he was bleeding like crazy. Like I thought I missed him in reality. Like when it happened, I was down on myself. I was kind of depressed. But the good thing about filming is then you can go back. If you have a camera on, you can go back and like slow motion it and move the frames and stuff. And I was like, holy shit, I did. I didn't look at my film until after I got down from the tree. I was in the tree after I shot at that deer for an hour kicking myself, and then I was just with my binos like staring at the spot where I shot him. And I was like, I think I see blood down there. Got down and went over, and there was tons of blood. There was a thick blood trail. And I couldn't make sense of it because it looked like it was a clear miss. I shot in front of him. But yeah, I ended up hitting him, and I waited a few hours, and I went on that blood trail, and it was a long blood trail, and I kicked him up out of a bed only 200 yards from where I shot him. He was in some really thick swampy stuff, but he brought me into places I would have never gone if I didn't shoot him and track him. They'll bring you into these little hideouts and these crazy places, and that all adds to your knowledge too. And like that's in the back of my mind every time I go in there now. It was a buck bedroom, and I would have never thought to look where this was.
Yeah, some of those unfortunate longer tracks.
Yeah,
you do learn some stuff, and that brings up. I've found a couple spots too like that where you're like, holy, I didn't even know this was here.
Yeah,
and those little honey holes. I hit a limb too on that one. Watching my arrow was flying perfect, and then I just couldn't see my arrow anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It deflected it just enough, and I was. But when I got down, there was so much blood, and then he went right up over this mountain. And I'm like, well, this isn't good. And then he just drip, and like I said, we tracked him for 2 days, and we jumped him. Like we ended up getting 4 of us down there, and we were trying to surround him and get another arrow in him, and we kept jumping him, and he just kept circling around these thick areas, and we finally stopped bleeding. We couldn't find him anymore, and like I said, he had almost completely healed up. A little bit of his brisket was still opened up, and my buddy got him. So that solved that mystery because I was sick about that one.
Yeah. This one, I must have hit an artery because when I jumped him out of his bed, it wasn't like a standard jump. He got up, and he was moving so slowly and groggy and like taking these little decrepit steps, walking away from me with his tail tucked between his legs. And when I saw that, I was like, he must have lost a ton of blood. And the blood trail had gotten sparse near the end there. And I think he just laid down in there, and he must have clotted it up or something. And I was expecting to go find a bed full of blood because he was so groggy. It had to have been from loss of blood.
Yeah.
And so I backed out completely and went back in like 2 hours before it got dark that night. Didn't find him again that night, even though I saw where the last point was where he walked off. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find any more blood. Went back in the next day after a sleepless night. Next morning, I was there, and I just scoured the area where I saw him going. And there was a road not too far from it, and all I saw was a tiny little speck of blood. One. And I was like, oh, it was like, that's like the holy grail when you think the deer's
hope.
gone. It was hope. Yeah, and he was just 75 yards from that speck in another little swamp. Flies all over him. Coyotes had gotten to him. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, a bad shot, if you can get lucky on the bad shot if you hit an artery or something, if you just stick with it. Yeah. I remember using my Onyx and putting the tracking feature on in that, so because I was grid searching sections, and I had walked probably like 7 miles in this tiny little piece of woods, but that's how much it was. 7 miles of grid searching, before I found that last speck of blood and found him.
Yeah. Like we talked at the beginning, you owe it to the animal. It sucks when it's part of bow hunting. You can make the almost perfect shot and just not hit a vital or an artery or something, and it makes you sick. But you got to give your due diligence. I've hunted around a lot of people that they give up way too quick, and I'm like, no, we're not. This deer's still bleeding. Like, we're gonna go look, and it's just something like you have to. If you're gonna pull the trigger, you're gonna exhaust it until you recover the deer. You can no longer find leaves slipped over or specks of blood, and that's part of hunting, and that's part of the responsibility I think we all have as hunters, because it's never the perfect. When it's the perfect scenario, when you watch them go down, it's it's a quick death. It's the greatest feeling, but it doesn't always play out that way, and you gotta put your time in.
Yeah, and if you remain optimistic, like try to always be optimistic, I think that'll help you in your resolve to find a deer, even though it can take a long time and it's exhausting. I think having optimism will feed energy into you to continue going on with the track, but also, even if you don't recover it, whoever's listening to this as a new hunter, you are going to wound a deer and not be able to find it, and just there's silver linings to that. You will learn stuff from that. You're going to learn what you did wrong, or like I said, he might take you on that track through a place that you never even thought to look. Like, everything is a learning moment, and even in the worst, you're going to feel dejected, but find the silver lining in it, because you're going to learn something valuable out of it.
Yeah, and I'm a stickler around, because I've hunted around a lot of people that are getting into hunting, and they say they missed one. And we go out there and can't find their arrow. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere until we either find your arrow.
That's the first piece. Yep.
If I find your arrow and there's not anything on it but mud, then we're good.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to look for your arrow. And like, where were you? Where was the deer? And, let's start investigating. Because if you did, a lot of people don't remember. And even folks that have killed a lot of deer, like, there's a lot of things going on. Like, you don't see everything, you don't know, and you got to find the evidence, and you're responsible for when you pull the trigger for the results of that. And if you find your arrow and it's all muddy and your broadhead's mashed, and then okay, clean the arrow up, get a new broadhead, and start over. But if it's not, then you never know.
Yeah, as a textbook example of that, last year, my buddy Chris shot a buck, and he said he couldn't find his arrow, couldn't find any blood, and asked if I'd go help him. And it was like an hour drive from where I was, but I couldn't wait to go down there and do that. And so the first thing was, he's like, all right, so here's my tree, here's where I was. I was sitting up there just below this limb coming off the tree, and I saw there was that dead tree right there that's tipped over a little bit. That's where I remember is where I shot, was right there, and he was dead certain about it. So we looked around there for a half hour, just painstakingly for any blood, but looking for the arrow first, because he said, yeah, it was a pass through. I remember seeing it go through, and I remember seeing it in sticking out of the ground at one point. It might have fallen down. I think it was a lighted knock, but the light wasn't on anymore. But it was kind of gray light in the morning, and you remember seeing it there and the deer running off. So after doing that for a while and then doing bigger and bigger loops out the way that he said he remembered the deer going, there was no sign of anything. And I said, we have to go back until we find the arrow. And I was just looking around a ton, just trying to get a lay of the land, and I saw another dead tree. It didn't look anything like the one that he thought it was, but went over to that dead tree. It was like 40 yards to the left of what he was certain was the area where he shot it, and we ended up finding the arrow over there, and there was blood on it. It wasn't great blood, but then we could see a blood trail plain as day then, and we were on that deer for quite a ways, 300 yards probably on the blood trail, and then we got to this point where we lost blood again, and I'm just looking at the lay of the land and where it is. It was in an pretty open area where we lost it, but I could see a thick knob right up down the ravine over up there. It was really thick, and he was ready to call it, and I was like, I just got a feeling that he could be up on that knob. That thick knob looks like a place to go. So had them stay in there. I said, I'm going to go back out to the trail. The trail went right around the knob, like this main hiking trail. I was like, I'm going to sneak up that knob, and if he's on there and he's not alive, maybe I'll kick him out. But I'm going to go check that before we give up. And I crept up that hill, and he jumped up out of his bed, full steam ahead. Didn't look like he was very injured at all, and he was a nice wide buck. He didn't go past them. He went off a different direction. But I was like, dude, yeah, sure enough, he was up there on that knob, and just to give you some satisfaction, like that deer's not going to die. It had almost been like he hadn't been shot. Just the way that he acted and looked, and he looked healthy, and he was fast out of there. There was no blood in his bed. I was like, that deer's going to live. But yeah, he was up there. It's just you learn a lot of stuff when you go on tracks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We've been going for a little more than 2 hours here. But I want to touch on just real quick, basically, what are some of your differences and strategies in how you hunt early season versus in the rut? Does your bow hunting strategy change at all from an early season hunt to the rut?
Yeah, it does. Like I said, early season, I love venison, so I'm not opposed. If it's not
to some doe shooting.
Yeah, I still have a hard time if doe and the fawns are still with her. I have a hard time doing that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of nice lone dry does that are wandering around, and I'm not opposed to setting up in spots where you're nearby, a bunch of briars or some old scrub apple trees and stuff like that where you expect to see some deer coming in to feed, because they're fattening up in October. And then come rut time, you're looking for those places, the funnels, the things where bucks cruise. You want to catch them when they're cruising. You want to catch them, when they're out looking for love. And you find where those spots are. You find those little spots that are just a little bit different. I think a lot of times, like, you'll see like landmarks with like a really big tree that's been there forever. Things like that. I think the deer, or you'll have a little patch of pines that were planted years ago, or tamaracks, or something, and there's just little places that that are close to like bedding areas to where you're not going to go mess with them, that they're going to come up out of their beds and they're going to start cruising, whether you're hunting near an area that's got fields where they're going to be headed towards those fields at nighttime where all the does are going to be, or whatever your terrain is, you want to get those spots that are close to where you think those bucks are going to be cruising after they're done bedding. And also, the last probably 8 years or so, 10 years, I watched the moon patterns. When it's a real big full moon, I'm expecting midday movements almost always. When it's real bright all night, I believe, and if you drive around on those nights,
they're out longer.
You'll almost hit deer everywhere you go.
Yeah.
I think those bucks run and chase all night long, and then they bed, and then late morning, early afternoon, they're getting up to do their next round. And I think that, in theory, that's when a lot of those bucks, the bigger bucks are cruising right around lunchtime.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier. I'm not sure if it was the part we didn't record or not, but, that 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, I've killed probably the majority of the bucks I've shot at that time frame. If it wasn't like right before dark or first 30 minutes of light, it's in that afternoon area when a lot of people don't sit and stay in their tree stands.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's why the summit, for me, I can sit daylight till dark. With the age of cell phones, and I can sit there and watch my Buffalo Bills play on a Sunday and stream it if I got cell phone signal.
Yeah.
That makes the day go by quicker, whatever. You can't hunt on Sundays. And
not here, no.
Right. But whatever the case may be, I can entertain myself all day. And, even if when it's the rut, you can go, 6-7 hours without seeing a deer. And all of a sudden the woods erupt. And you'll hear movement and then deer coming. I know down in Ithaca, where my dad's camp is, years ago, a spot I hunted, I saw 13 deer in one set.
Yep.
A doe came through. She was blatting and her tongue was hanging out, and like 11 deer went by me. None of them had racks. They were all spikes and little scrub bucks, but just one at a time. And I'm sitting there with my bow waiting for, you're looking like, where's the big buck? And, I had 11 deer come through, and then later on a bigger buck came through, just a little different angle. He wasn't huge, but he was a rack buck. And then, a straggler came through later on, just following the chaos. So, if you're not in your stand when that happens, you're missing an opportunity, and it happens fast. Like you can go like I've gone all day, and then, you don't even see a deer, and then all of a sudden, 30 minutes before dark, that buck's cruising, and and there it is. Your whole day is summed up in a split second, and then you're celebrating. So it really is just being in the areas you're confident, you got the right cover, and bucks are going to cruise, and you find those funnels, you find those points that they kind of have to go through, and you focus on those, and it pays off, and you got to hunt the wind. Like if that spot doesn't work for the way the wind's blowing, then you better have plan B, C, D, and E, and F, and everything else lined up in your back pocket.
Yeah, and you do all that when you're scouting.
Yeah.
So make sure you're prepared. Yeah, I mean, last year I the best day in terms of how many deer I saw, I didn't get into my stand till 10 a.m. But that was just when I could get in. But it was during the rut still, and I knew that there, midday cruising could be happening. I got into that stand. I saw 44 deer from the stand, seven different bucks, a bunch of big doe groups, and it was just an incredible day. There's chasing going on. I mean, and it seemed like it was every hour or something I would get a spurt of action. And I'm pretty sure it was 44 different deer, like the way the doe groups moved, and like one massive group of does, like 11 or 12 of them went down behind me way over here, and then an hour later another one came from way up here. I'm pretty sure that wasn't the same group. So it was a crazy day.
Yeah, that's a lot of deer.
But a lot of people might be able, if you're a morning hunter guy, give up on the day because you didn't get, you couldn't get in there till 10. But no, man, just get in there. Anything can happen.
I mean, if you're hunting after work, or if there's things there's not control, you just got to be in the woods when you can be. But if you're fortunate to have vacation or time off, or the weekends, during November, first 2 weeks of November, you have to be ready. For New York, once gun season starts, it's almost depressing for me. Southern tier anyway. Northern tier's gun starts, it's like a very short bow season, and then northern tier is a lot different. New York's split in half, and very different hunting in both areas. There's a lot more deer traditionally in the southern tier. There's places in the northern tier there's a lot of deer, but you get into the Adirondacks and the big woods up there. It's tough hunting, and like I said, there's pockets of deer, and
around the towns you got pockets.
Probably. Oh yeah, basically, and southern tier and the agricultural areas and things like that where there's a lot of food. The southern tier, there's a lot more deer. 44 deer anywhere in New York, that's not even a reality from what I'm used to. That's that's an awesome type of spot. But there's places in New York you will see a lot of deer, and you got to work at it. You got to move around, and some people are fortunate and they just have family farms and places they can go or year after year.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of state land, there's a lot of public land, and like I said, I look for these leases that border that. So you have a base camp, you have some spots that you can learn and kind of work at and do some things, and you got a whole bunch of other land that you can explore right there that you don't have to drive an hour every day.
Stretch your legs on. I would just encourage people not to get stuck on one go-to spot. That even if you've got 2 or 3 years in a row there and it's like this has been great, because that'll end up, there's going to be a couple of years where it's dry because of the food sources or some other reason. And the only reason I found that spot where I saw 44 deer, and the average day in that spot, I'll see 8 to 12 deer and at least a couple of bucks. Like I said, I can see a long ways there, but I wouldn't have found that spot if I just stuck it out in my other go-to spot. It was by necessity to go out and scout and find a acorn producing tree that I found it, and now that's my favorite spot. And just continually, do that if you're getting into it. Don't be satisfied with one place. You never know, especially around here. Some place might get developed. Somebody might buy it and put condos in there or something. Your spot's not going to be that go-to spot forever, so have some backup plans.
Yeah, I get bored.
Yeah.
I get bored easy. Like my strategy is I get down to camp. I might run my climber out in the dark, put it where I like a spot that I want to start based on the weather I've looked at. Come back down to camp and I go there first thing in the morning, or I'll carry my standing in the morning, and then I'll hunt that in the morning, and I'll hunt it at night, or I'll hunt all day, and then I'll go back up there the next morning.
Yep.
I'll hunt it in the morning, then I'll pull my climber out. I usually move, hunt that afternoon, leave it overnight. So I usually will do 2 to 3 sits in each spot as I'm honing in. And like I said, I'll leave my climber right there overnight and go right back to it the next morning, climb right back up. But you don't want to leave it there all the time.
No, but that is the best feeling, though, when you know you don't have to carry it out of the woods and you've got it set up for the next morning with the climber. I love that.
Right. So, but you get a new spot and you get a place. You know, you might have to backpack it in that morning.
Yeah.
You know,
and it's not terrible, but walking out of the woods and
you're going to be a little more sweaty that morning, and you hunt. But I like to give it a morning, evening, and at least the next morning, and then usually if it's not panning out to what I expected, that next morning I'm already planning my next 3 moves and where I'm going to go. And like I said, with 2 climbers, sometimes I'll already have another one in the spot waiting for the right time. I'll cut a couple hemlock branches and put them over the top of it. I've never had a stand or anything come up missing, and I'm usually there. I'm not going to leave it there for a week, but if I get down at night, there's times when it's not going to rain.
Yeah.
I'll leave my bow right up in the tree, and
I've done that a couple. Yeah.
And I go right back out in the morning with just my backpack with a fresh thing of water and some cashews and all my stuff, and climb right back up. And, it's less things you got to carry into the morning. I'm traveling only in the dark, so there's a lot of little things like that have just been successful over time, and you just find your niche, and you just got to be enjoying it. It's got to be fun, and when it's not being fun, you're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
Some people put too much pressure on themselves, and I've been through that myself. Like, everybody else is seeing big deer, and I haven't seen any deer, and you got to reflect on yourself and what you're doing, and you got to step up your game. You got to challenge yourself. It's you against the deer, and it's fun.
Yeah, and just remain optimistic. As long as you have optimism, the world is gonna reveal itself to you.
Yeah.
In strange ways. All right, last thing before we sign off. What was What was the best thing Lanny Benoit told you in your 2 hours with him at Huntstock, New York, a couple of years ago? You have any, that he wouldn't mind you sharing?
Well, the kind of, the thing that he said that kind of resonated with me is like, and he definitely uses some hunting camp language that, you and your buddies. So that was the most fun. Like, you hear about the Benoits and, you're reading the magazines, and then you talk to the guy, and he's just like every other old timer that you've had at hunting camp, and you're just listening to these stories, and a little bit you're beside yourself. Like, I'm sitting here drinking Yingling Lights with Lanny Benoit, and he's telling me all these hunting stories, but he was telling me stories how he's out with some other guys, and at times when they were doing some of their filming, or they're out with guys that just weren't woodsmen, and they're telling him, hey, we got to go this way to get back to camp, and he's like, or why aren't you wearing a compass? And he goes, his little sayings about wearing a compass. He goes, because I know where I'm going, and if I walk that way, I'm going to come out over there, and just little things. He keeps it so simple, and he just says some of the things that you think this guy's killed a ton of big bucks, and but he's keeping it simple. He just does what he does, and the guy was commenting like, we got to go this way, and he's like, well, I'm telling you, you can go this way, and I'll probably have to come back here and get you,
but I'm going this way.
I'm going this way, and I'm going to come out of my truck. And the guy finally got done arguing with him and went with him, and he came out there, and the guy was like, oh, you really did know where you were.
How the hell did you do that in the dark?
Like,
I remember that story.
I've been in the woods my whole effing life. He just grew up in the woods, and he learned the woods, and then he just became a really, he wanted to kill big bucks like the old timers were, and he set out to do that. And, that was what he was raised around, and, and then he's just a regular guy. He's sitting there talking about things and just telling hunting stories, and, he was listening to my hunting stories, and, it was phenomenal.
Yeah,
it was like, who gets an opportunity to do this? Like, we were just sitting here talking, and we took some pictures, and one of his stories he was telling, I had my phone there, and I started recording it and listening to him. I would never post that online or anything.
Yeah.
I just listen to it every once in a while. It just cracks me up because, he tells good stories and they're real.
He does.
He doesn't sugarcoat them, and, it was enjoyable. You hear these people and they're mysterious, and then you talk to him. He's just a deer hunter.
Yeah.
And he loves it just as much as us, and he was really good at it.
And you're right. He keeps it simple, and their whole way they hunt is very simple and just to the basics. And, somebody listening might be like, well, how come he's killing all those bucks and I'm not if it's so simple? He's got a never quit, tenacious attitude is one thing. And then the other thing is he's just spent so much time in the woods that you can't replicate. Yeah. You can't replicate that. So you add all those things together. Simple. Yeah, I'm never going to quit. I got all this motivation and, been in the woods for 60 years. That's why he's, that's why he's so good.
And I like doing everything myself. Like, I've only paid for a hunting guide once, and I went on a moose hunt up in Newfoundland, and you have to.
Yeah.
And I actually had a blast with my guide, and I got a decent Newfoundland bull. But, I don't, and nothing against guides. Like, I respect them. They're the best of the best in their trades, and, it's one thing about being a good hunter. It's another thing about being a great hunter that can get other people animals.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that, maybe not at their level, but I want to challenge myself to be able to do it myself.
Yeah.
And I want to go scout things myself. I don't want the easy way. I don't want to go to a place that, there's 50 Boone and Crockett bucks on the property and I'm just going to go out and kill it. It's just not.
Yeah.
I want to go to a place that's challenging. I want to learn it. I want to kill one of the better deer on the property and, and get good at it myself.
Yeah, you want to get to that reward all by yourself.
Yeah. And that's just how I've always been. There's people that I listen to that talk about hunting, and I can completely tune them out because what they're saying doesn't make sense to me. And then there's guys that, guys or gals that they talk about it, and you immediately know, like, they're the real deal. Like, This is stuff that I think about. This is stuff that, I've wondered about, and they do it. And, they may not be a big buck killer all the time. They may be just a really good hunter, and you can get a lot of things from a lot of people just to kind of diversify, what you're doing. Because I think bow hunting for me has made me a worse gun hunter. I've been in situations where I'm gun hunting, and I move slow, and when I was younger,
same with me.
Yeah, and it's like, no, like, you got like a split second to make that shot on that deer, and I'm sitting here waiting for a perfect so bow hunting, and I almost got it. Because I've been getting more into gun hunting again over the last few years. I do like it. I like walking. I like just covering the ground. And like, I wasn't exposed and grew up, as a big woods tracker. I think I could have picked that up pretty decent. I have some of those skills and some of that experience doing it. It just wasn't what we did when I grew up and then getting into bow hunting.
Yep.
But I love the challenge of that. And, I look for times when we do get some snow up there. I love now trying to do that and experimenting with some different ways, which guys have made a living off of killing big bucks every year by doing it. Some of them only get out of the woods 5 or 6 times. They get a big buck, they kill it, and they're done. Like,
yeah, Donito.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I love the whole hunting season, so it's different for me. But, to look at the tactics that they do and then try to see if I can find my own way. I'm trying to get into that mindset, and I kind of got a reset after bow season. Like you said, I can't get a tree stand because I'm nuts. I'm like, the deer are out there, I'm sitting here, like, I'm not waiting. And so, yeah.
Yeah, 2 years ago when I shot that one, I lost a buck because it was the first day of gun season, and I had just hunted like 60 days almost in a row in bow season, so I was still acting like a bow hunter.
Yeah.
But I was still hunting that day, and I was walking up this ridge, and I saw a doe just standing broadside, and she was looking at me, and I stopped in my tracks, and I said, "Ooh, I'm gonna wait here and see what happens." I end up seeing some tines moving. It wasn't this deer. He was a big, wide 10-pointer. I could just see the tips of his tines on the other side of the ridge moving, and picked up my rifle to check. I was like, "Ooh, that's a big buck." The doe's on this side of the ridge. I know he's going to come over to her, so I'm just going to wait. And I waited. He finally came over. When she stared at me for 5 minutes or so without moving, and he didn't come over the entire time. I could just see his rack moving back there. And then when she finally took off, I knew it was a matter of time. She's going to take off. But when she does, she's on my side. As long as she doesn't go back over that side, he's going to follow her. And that's what happened. She took off. He came up. I had my scope up on his tines when she took off, and he came over the ridge, and he was looking right at me, and I shot right in his neck, and it dropped him. And I was like, oh, he's dead. You know, it was a muzzleloader, and I had to reload. And first of all, I thought he was dead, and so I started filming myself, like, oh, I just got one. And as I was doing that, he got out of his bed, and his front shoulders were paralyzed, and he was pushing himself across the ridge, and then stopping every 30 seconds or so. He'd stop again, and I thought maybe he's dead. But while that's happening, I'm like, now I got to reload. But I was reloading like I was a bow hunter. I was going slow, where it's stupid looking at it in hindsight, but because, I should have been reloading as fast as I can, and I've done 100 of those before, and I can do it in 20 seconds, but it ended up taking me like 3 minutes to reload. I had a mishap. My gun tipped over between my legs, and the powder, I was using powder, not pellets and stuff, and the powder all rolled out, so I had to restart. And I never
amateur hour,
and I never got a second shot off on him. And I thought for sure. Still, I was optimistic. I'm like, I shot him in the neck, and he was pretty paralyzed, but I never found him, and he survived because I got pictures. Or the landowner sent me pictures of him the very next day, just on his feet feeding. But if I wasn't in bow hunter mode 60 straight days, I would have been in, I wouldn't have made that mishap of not reloading as fast as I could. I was just for some reason trying to reload like a sloth so that he didn't pick me up as he was laying there on the side of the hill.
They're totally different.
Yeah.
You got to train, I don't say train differently, but it's a different mindset.
You got to reset.
You do.
Back in, it's hard to do, but. Well, I appreciate you coming in, Scott. That was a great podcast, man.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and good luck to your daughter in the game tomorrow. I'm sure you guys will have fun. You guys going out anywhere to dinner or anything? Got any plans?
Dad's got like 10 Cabela's gift cards. He wants to go burn up the Cabela's. Yeah. So we're going to run up to Cabela's and then get something to eat and just chill out.
Good. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys coming. And thanks for sitting in over there, Dad.
No problem.
Yeah, bathroom's down the stairs if you need it. I know I do. But thanks, Scott. Appreciate it, man.
It was great. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure.